It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org.
Welcome, everybody. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I am Andrew Posadas. Alongside Chris Hennessy, Michael Egan will give us updates and headlines throughout the day. And as always, our producer, Alex Walls, making sure we sound clear and concise over WFUV 90.7 FM, One on One. And Chris, right away, I have to say something because the last time I saw you, I did not have this beard. I feel like Tom Hanks in Castaway. I had this nice little goatee. Then 6-7 months passed by. I see you again, and now we both have beards. We both are sporting the beards, and I think we look pretty spiffy.
Oh, you as well, my friend. It's been too long. It's been a long time coming, and I was on 90.7 a couple weeks ago with Jimmy Sullivan and Chris Bocci. It's good to be back, man. It's quarantine was a long time, but it's fun to have not only be talking about sports, but have sports to talk about, which was even as bad as the Jets are, it's still good to have them back, you know.
Yeah, and glad to be back in our original time slot from 11 to 2 here on 90.7. And a lot to get to this weekend, Chris. Obviously, we'll be going into first with the World Series. The Dodgers get a pivotal Game 3 victory. And now it feels like they're firmly in control in that World Series. But again, you never know. This Tampa Bay Rays team does not know how to say die. So going forward, both teams really, I mean, we should be expecting a 6 or 7 game series.
Absolutely. What the Rays showed in Game 2 was that they are just as talented offensively, maybe not on paper, but in practice as LA. I mean, you get 2 home runs from Brandon Lau. And that's in a game where G-Man Choi doesn't do a lot. He shows up. He has a couple big hits last night in a loss. But to me, Tampa Bay is not out of it with how good their bullpen is. I mean, when they're able to throw out Anderson and all of their big guys out of that bullpen, as Kevin Cash called it, the stable of guys who can throw 98, as the Yankees showed in Game 5, as the Astros showed in the 4 games they lost, and now as the Dodgers showed, that is a really tough bullpen to go against. So when Kershaw and Buehler aren't out there for LA to throw up zeros for the Dodgers, that bullpen is able to come in for the Rays and stifle the Dodgers offense.
Yeah, we'll get more into a recap of the Dodgers win Friday night and preview what we might see moving forward in the World Series between the Dodgers and the Tampa Bay Rays. A little bit later on in the 11 o'clock hour, we're going to get into some football because we have to, Chris. And I think starting with the New York Giants, there's optimism. And when we get to it, I think there is cause for Giants fans to think that, hey, we're 2 games out and there's still a good chance with the dumpster fire that the NFC East is. The Giants still have a shot, Chris, to possibly win that division and potentially host a playoff game.
Yeah, I mean, dumpster fire is putting it lightly. I mean, they have a chance. It's Dumb and Dumber, so you're saying there's a chance. But, man, oh, man, that hurt last Thursday night. That is a loss that they are not going to be able to bounce back from. If they finish 5-11 and Philly finishes 5-10-1, that's going to be one that hurts when they look back on it. Yes, they were close against Dallas and against Chicago, but when you have that 2-possession lead and not being able to put it away in a division that can be won with 5 or 6 or 7 wins, that one's going to hurt going forward for sure.
And while there might be, even with that loss, there's some optimism for Giants fans. One fan base that just cannot find a sliver of optimism are New York Jets fans. And unfortunately, Chris, we're going to have to talk about them. They face the Bills, a team that's lost 2 straight. They're hungry for a win. Our own Nick DeLuca is hungry for a win. So for you, Jackson, E-Man, Jimmy, Bocce, and the rest of the Jets fan base that makes up our sports section, it might be another week of winless football, even though you're getting back some key pieces on offense.
Yeah, getting back Darnold, Becton, or getting Mims will no doubt help, but it's still the worst team maybe in the history of football, question mark. It's up there because they're really, really bad, man. It's hard to watch. The 24-0 loss against the Dolphins was one of the lowest moments, I think, in Jets fandom, because there was nothing going, and now you have a future star getting his start against the Jets. Yes, Tua didn't do much, but he comes into that game, and theoretically the Dolphins will never look back for the next 10 years with their star quarterback, as the Jets blow another first-round draft pick on a quarterback. Third time this decade if you go Sanchez and Pennington, and now they go and they're going to try again in April with Trevor Lawrence. It is the never-ending cycle of mediocrity. It is the never-ending cycle of just terrible, terrible, terrible football. And yes, Mike Legan and I will release our shoulders of the tension that is the New York Football Jets.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best to just be that therapist, make it a safe space for you and Michael to just say what you got to say, because again, we're back on 90.7 FM and everybody needs to hear this, because Jets fans, I mean, this is the truth. You got to just, you can't peel off the Band-Aid. You just got to rip it off and just look at the wound for what it is, because this season isn't going to get any better. And as you mentioned, Michael Legan will join us for that. He'll also have headlines going into the 12 o'clock hour. We'll get into some more NFL talk. Obviously, Antonio Brown recently signing with the Bucs. We'll get into a few teams, find out if they're pretenders or contenders. And then later on in that 12 o'clock hour, in that midnight hour, Chris, we have an interview with former Major League Baseball umpire John Hirschbeck. And John is going to talk in deep about the game of baseball, what we're seeing so far in the World Series, his history as a former umpire, and obviously the Magic of Baseball auction for his foundation, The Magic of Michael, which we can find on collectibleexchange.com. But again, a lot to talk with the former MLB umpire and John Hirschbeck, Chris.
Yeah, we spoke to him earlier today. It was great. He was an awesome guy and doing a lot of great things for charity. I'm not even going to try to do it justice. Just hearing him describe what he does and what his foundation does for people all over the state of Ohio and all over the country is truly amazing. And definitely go check it out, magicofmichael.com, and you can hear him plug that later at 12:40.
Yeah, and you'll hear more about the Magic of Baseball auction, which will run through November 14th. John Hirschbeck, definitely a very insightful interview from someone who knows the game of baseball. And Chris, from there, a lot to transition to. There is some NBA talk. So Michael will come back with some headlines in our final hour, talk about the possibility of the NBA starting in December, which seems like it would be obviously a congestion since we haven't had the draft yet, haven't had free agency. So we'll get into that. And then a little bit later on in our final hour, Chris, I think a topic that needs to be spoken about, fans in the stands. We're seeing it in the World Series. We saw it in the NLCS. We've seen it in college football, but it doesn't look like safety protocols are being enforced. So, Chris, it just feels like as much as we might want fans in the stands for that sense of normalcy, maybe we're better off not having it, considering what's happening around us with a potential spike up and coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you watch a college football game, no matter the conference that is allowing fans, it's concerning to say the least. So I think it's definitely a conversation we have to have. And I think that more and more colleges, obviously after Thanksgiving, theoretically all colleges will not have fans in the stands anymore. But between now and then, I do see more colleges prohibiting fans or lessening tickets to the games, because colleges are struggling as the country is struggling, and these football games, you would almost think that everything is normal, which clearly it's not. So I think that it's definitely a conversation to have as we go into another Saturday of college football with fans in many, many stands across the country.
Yeah, and we saw Big Ten come back on Friday night with Wisconsin and Illinois. The Pac-12 is set to come back, and those two conferences, they are going to start without fans in the stands. So interesting to see if maybe starting a little bit later, works to the benefit of conferences like the Big Ten or the Pac-12. But we'll have more about fans in the stands in the final hour. And before we say goodbye to you guys, have to play one of our favorite games here on One-on-One. Who you got? 5 good matchups and really some tasty ones on Sunday, Chris, headlined by 2 undefeated teams, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Tennessee Titans. We'll find out who's legit, who's not, as both teams are vying to be not only the best team in the AFC, but right now prove that they're the best team in the NFL.
Yeah, great slate of games this week, and Steelers-Titans only starts it off at 1 o'clock. I mean, you got Bucs-Raiders, you got Chiefs-Broncos, and the night game is Seattle-Arizona, which is in another great division in the NFC West. So this is probably the best slate of NFL games so far this season, and it is a reason to get excited because around here, as we'll talk about coming up, it's a dark days ahead.
Yeah, and Chris, Michael, and I will have picks for you. Have some winners. Obviously, you cannot gamble here in New York, but those in New Jersey and around who can, we're going to try and make you some money. And if not, don't blame us because you can't call in anyway. But Chris, again, and this is fun to me because I think when we're talking about the last time we did a show, I think you and I and our former coworker, Jack Caldwell, might have done a show in January. So January, February-ish, and so much. It feels like everything was different. Like it's just another decade, another time, an alternate universe back then. But just to think of where we've come from March when everything shut down to now that the NBA has completed a shortened season. They finished their season more or less. The WNBA, they went to the bubble, completed a season. The MLS had a tournament. They have their season going on now. And then Major League Baseball is about to finish their season that was shortened no less. And the NFL is trying to navigate its way towards the end of its season. But you had to think back in March, I think everyone was pessimistic that we weren't going to be able to fit everything in by the end of the year. Yet here we are. And a credit to these professional sports leagues, we've seen positive tests and certain outbreaks within specific teams. But again, these leagues have been able to navigate through that and get through their respective seasons.
Yeah, I think you look at the NBA, NHL, WNBA, MLS, and MLB all finishing their seasons, and it gives you hope for both football and college football that they're going to be able to figure out a way to finish this around the time that they normally do in January and February. But yeah, when I think back to the pre-pandemic days, if you will, I went to an Islander game in the afternoon and a Ranger game at night on the March 7th, and on March 9th, I was home for the next 7+ months now. So it was kind of a wild transition, and to lose every sport and then have it all come back and all finish now is nothing short of remarkable. And it's good to be talking about it, man. I mean, we went a long time there without one-on-one as well. Obviously, there was nothing to talk about, but a long time without one-on-one, and to have the hard work by Bobby and E-Man and Alex to get us back and on the air. It's awesome to be back.
Yeah. And again, hope to have a good 3 hours talking all things sports, from the World Series to the Giants, Jets, everything in the NFL world, talk some NBA, talk things outside as far as fans are concerned, and obviously give you some good picks for the best matchups of the NFL weekend. And again, stick around because there's going to be takes here. Chris and I haven't done the show in a while, so we're going to have to give you everything we've got, because if not, Chris, they're not going to let us come back and do this again. So I hope you know the pressure's on for both of us to be magnificent.
No doubt.
All right, and the magnificent hot takes will take place after this upcoming break. But on the other side, we'll get into the World Series. Game 3, the Dodgers win. Where the series goes from here, Chris and I will break all that down after this break.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Here on One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Andrew Posadas, Chris Hennessy, taking you along for the ride for the next 3 hours as we talk all things sports. And Chris, I think it is safe to say, and most sports fan would agree, no matter what it is, no matter what sport, in a 7-game series, Game 3 is incredibly pivotal into finding out who ultimately ends up winning that series. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Game 3 and Game 5, you look at as two really big swing games in a 7-game series. And if you go just to Friday night, a huge performance from Walker Buehler to get that first swing game to LA. And that other swing game is going to be started by Clayton Kershaw. So that's not too bad.
Yeah, Friday night saw the Dodgers take advantage, use some small ball. We saw some singles, a safety squeeze, everything coming out of the woodwork, stolen bases. The Dodgers beat the Rays 6-2. And as you mentioned, Walker Buehler was absolutely fantastic. 6 innings, 3 hits, just that earned run and 10 Ks. And for Charlie Morton on the other side, really had a good start, but again, got caught up a lot of times with hits with 2 outs. 5 of the 6 runs came on 2-strike hits. So for Charlie Morton, it's just some bad luck there. But again, Chris, it's interesting to me because this matchup, you're talking about a team in the Dodgers that have a huge payroll. That lineup up and down, anybody could mash out a home run at any single time or at any point in a game. And then with Tampa Bay, that's kind of, the team that, $40-50 million payroll, guys who are coming up, developed, and really guys who play, that you would think play a small ball way. But again, in the 4th inning, we saw the Dodgers take it upon themselves to do things that right now, from what we've seen, the world of baseball is kind of frowned upon. That analytics say that you go for the home run, you go for the hits, or you're usually striking out. So it's very refreshing to see some kind of old school baseball in Game 3 on Friday night.
Absolutely. I mean, what a game for Austin Barnes. They said he was the 2nd player ever, first catcher in a World Series game to hit a home run and safety squeeze for an RBI. And then he plays a great game defensively behind the plate and helps lead the Dodgers to a big win. And look, yes, when you're able to start your lineup up with Mookie Betts, Corey Seager, and Justin Turner, and you still haven't gotten to Cody Bellinger, yeah, you're going to win a lot of baseball games. But at the end of the day, to me, it's Clayton Kershaw and Walker Buehler that set this team apart. Because at some point, every major league team who gets this far, especially this far, it's the World Series, but every major league team who gets to the division series, gets to the championship series, can string together a couple of hits. When you're able to throw out a guy like Clayton Kershaw and then 2 days later come with Walker Buehler and 2 days later back to Kershaw again, you're going to have a hard time beating that team no matter who it is. And I think that's what you saw fault the Yankees when Masahiro Tanaka was not able to give you Masahiro Tanaka starts. That's what you saw with the Astros. Greinke was okay and Verlander is hurt. And now that's kind of what you're seeing with the Rays, where Morton wasn't that great last night, and now they're going to have to lean on Snell and Glass now to be better than average to get them back into this series. So for me, yeah, as much as the big payroll helps, and yes, Clayton Kershaw is getting paid a ton of money, but to me, it is the pitching that really sets these two teams apart. And Charlie Morton's been great in the playoffs. I'm not going to deny that. I know that firsthand from Game 7 of the ALCS 3 years ago. But Bueller was fantastic last night.
Yeah, and you mentioned that those hits, with 2 strikes and 2 outs, Morton's right there to finish them off. I mean, he had hitters where he wanted to. He had him in the position to get out of those jams. But again, credit to the Dodgers and to their manager, Dave Roberts, deciding, hey, we're going to steal bases. You know what? We're going to call the safety squeeze. We're going to emphasize to our hitters, hit the ball, hit for contact. Don't worry about sending one over the fence. Let's just get guys on base and let's get some runs in and work from there. And as you mentioned with the Yankees, I mean, they've been very analytic driven, as a majority of teams have been in Major League Baseball. But at some point, you just got to go with your gut, right? I mean, you just can't listen to what the machine is spewing out for you and telling you, hey, you have to go about this at bat this way. You have to go about your pitching this way. I mean, sometimes a manager just has to take it upon himself to make the right call. And again, it paid off for the Dodgers, and now they are up 2-1 in the series.
And I'm sure that analytics machine would tell you that Austin Barnes getting an RBI in that situation would be extremely beneficial to the Dodgers, and that's what he did by laying down a bunt. And to me, it's tonight's game that is really huge, because the Dodgers have an opportunity with Urias on the mound to take a commanding lead that I'm not totally sure the Rays can come back from. I don't know how highly or not so highly you think of the Rays. I do think very highly of them as a Yankee fan, watching all 18 times they played them this season. I don't think there's any way that I couldn't. But this offense has been a little bit stagnant in the 2 games they've lost. And to me, it's a lot is riding on this game for the Rays to get right and not have to face Kershaw in an elimination game.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I respect the heck out of the Tampa Bay Rays. Obviously beat the Yankees. They were able to at least make sure that the Astros didn't finish that potential 3-0 comeback. But again, I think you're right. That offense has not been what it was. Obviously, Arozarena had that late home run, and I believe he broke the postseason record by Derek Jeter for most hits. And he's just the 4th player in postseason history alongside Bonds, Carlos Beltran, somebody else that I'm forgetting. Yeah. My apologies. But again, the only person to have 8 home runs in a single postseason. But again, you're right. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be on this Rays starting pitching and that entire pitching staff moving forward. Obviously, Kevin Cash knows that he can throw out guys. He has guys who can come out and give you 100 miles per hour and guys who are specialists for certain situations. And at this point, it's going to be up to that pitching staff to contain this Dodgers offense and hope that the Rays can maybe win close games, whether it's 3-1, 4-2. That's what they're going to have to hope for. Score a few runs and hope that pitching staff can be dominant enough and at least neutralize that Dodgers lineup from 1 to 9 and go from there. But again, I just think at the end of the day, both teams were respectfully going through both of their respective leagues. But the Dodgers, man, that team is just loaded. And it feels like they don't have any questions that need to be answered. They have everything they need. And right there, that I think whatever happens Saturday, if they're able to take that 3-1 lead, as you mentioned, I think that is going to be too much for the Rays to overcome unless that offense can get going. And obviously they have the guys to do so. When you talk about Choi, Kiermaier, Arozarena, there are guys there. Those bats just have to wake up.
Yeah, just to finish off your point there, Nelson Cruz was the 4th guy tied at 8 home runs. So it's Beltran, Cruz, Arozarena, and Bonds. And then Corey Seager has 7 this postseason, so he's 1 away from making that a 5-way tie. The Dodgers, to me, they only have one question, and the question comes with Kenley Jansen. And you mentioned the Arozarena home run last night. That was hit off of Kenley Jansen. And I liked Dave Roberts going to him in a 6-1 game just to see what happens, right? Because you're not going to play – like, this happens in the regular season. Maybe – I don't mean to pick on the Pirates, but maybe you wait till you play the Pirates, who are terrible, and you throw them out there and it's like, all right, well, like, let's just see what happens. You don't have that anymore, right, at the World Series. So in a 6-1 game, I like putting him out there. But he does give up the bomb to Arozarena. And other than that, he was fine. But as we saw with Aroldis Chapman, 1 run is sometimes too many. So that's the one question for me, is they're going to get to a point where it's a 2-2 game, a 3-2 game in the 9th inning. And who are they going to go to if they've already used Blake Trinan and all their other big bullpen arms? Are they going to trust Kenley Jansen, or are they going to go to a starter potentially, like we saw with Madison Bumgarner and Charlie Morton in the World Series a couple years ago? So that, to me, is the one question that I have for the Dodgers. But it's a small question because outside of that, their bullpen has been pretty good. But the question for the Rays is, without a doubt, that offense waking up on a more than one game basis. Yes, they were great in game 2. Brandon Lau theoretically breaks out of the slump, but then he strikes out 3 times on Friday night. So then he's right back in it. So the Rays have a lot of questions to answer. The Dodgers just have the one. And to me, I picked the Dodgers going in. I can't go off of it now. It just doesn't – I'm not seeing enough from the Rays in the 2 losses that make me say the next time Kershaw and Buehler come out, they're going to be able to hit them.
Yeah, I picked the Rays before the series just because, they beat the Yankees. They earned my respect, but obviously would not be surprised if the Dodgers won either. But just looking at the trends of the first 3 games, when the Dodgers can get runs up, when they have a lead and they have a surmountable lead, they're able to finish the deal. But as we saw in game 2, when that game was close, Tampa Bay was ultimately able to prevail. They won 6-4. So I guess for the trends, if the Dodgers are able to front run and get a good enough lead, it looks like they're going to close the deal and win this series. But again, if the Tampa Bay Rays can make this close going into those last 3 innings and use that pitching staff and get timely hitting like they have throughout the postseason, as long as these games are close, Tampa Bay could certainly find themselves back in it, tie the series up. And then from there, as you mentioned, that pivotal game 5, it'd be a best of 3, and anything's up for grabs when you talk about both of these pitching staffs.
Yeah. Tonight's game is really, really big for Tampa Bay, as we said, because yes, they have Glasnow and Snell coming up again, but Kershaw and Buehler were better the first 2 times. So it'll be very interesting to see how this goes. I think it will end in 6 games. That's what I'm going to say. I think the Rays will win tonight, then Kershaw will win game 5, and the Dodgers will close it out in game 6. That's just how I'm feeling right now. I don't have a good reason for you. That's how the gut goes,
Watching this, Chris, it makes me upset because the Yankees, for everything that they've done, just to have Garrett Cole and then basically a carousel afterwards in that starting rotation. We've seen it. We saw it last year with the Nationals. When you can have 2 aces, 2 guys that you can say, all right, these 2 guys are game 1, game 2, or however you want to put it, we can shuffle them and have 2 aces at our disposal in a 5 or a 7 game series. The Rays, same. They have Morton, Snell, Glasnow, as you mentioned. They have horses that they can go to in their rotation. And it just feels like for the Yankees, as much money as they have in that payroll and as much money as they're going to have to invest in the offense, at the end of the day, if you want to make it far and you want to get to a World Series and potentially win it, it feels like you have to at least have a minimum of 2 aces that you can go to in a 7 game series.
Without a doubt. And I think the Yankees needed to rely on Masahiro Tanaka to be that guy this year, and he wasn't, as he had been in many years past. And then if Tanaka leaves, which I think there's a good chance, if you ask me to pick right now, I'd say he's going to leave. I obviously hope he doesn't, but if he leaves, you're relying on a guy in Luis Severino who, coming off of Tommy John surgery, as bad as he was in the 2017 wildcard game, he picked it up after that in the division series and the championship series. But he doesn't have that much playoff experience. And the first thing that comes to your mind, unlike Tanaka with some great games, is the full-blown disaster against Oakland at the stadium. And so you're relying on Severino to play the Glasnow-Snell role or I guess the Snell-Morton role in this rotation next year if you don't re-sign Masahiro Tanaka. Will Domingo Germán come back? That's a question. Will Jordan Montgomery take the next step after he was out with the Tommy John? There's a lot of questions. I think carousel is a great way to put it because it's just up and down, up and down. Lots of questions behind Garrett Cole on the pitching staff. I think one of those questions in Luis Severino can be answered very early in the season, though, because it's really just how he comes back from this Tommy John surgery. Because if he comes back and it's 2017 Luis Severino, this team has those 2 guys, in my opinion. If he comes back and he's 2018 Luis Severino, we might be in trouble, the royal we, and the Yankees can find themselves in the same position that they were in this year, where after Garrett Cole pitches, and I forget Davey Garcia, of course, he's only 20 years old. He can certainly become that guy, but you can't rely on him to be that guy next year. But they're going to find themselves in that same situation where they feel like in game 2, they have to pull a switch, a righty-lefty switch after the first inning just to try and throw the Rays off guard, which they shouldn't have to do, right? You look at Charlie Morton in this game, you have Snell already go. He wins you a game. Right after that, right? So let's just take the Rays in this series and the Yankees in the ALDS. Snell goes, wins them game 2. Cole goes, wins the Yankees game 1. After that, yes, the Rays lost last night, but they were able to put their faith in a guy who's won a World Series, who won them game 7 in the ALCS, who is a true veteran of this game and is a damn good pitcher. The Yankees went with 20-year-old Davey Garcia, let him throw 20 pitches, pulled him out, and put in Jay Happ, who stunk. So that's the difference to me. And it's going to be about, I think, really Luis Severino, because I just don't see a way the Yankees are going to re-sign both DJ and Tanaka this winter. I just don't see that. I hope it happens, but to me, those are too high numbers that they're going to have to let one of them go.
Yeah, if nothing else, we've learned that you can have the best offense that you want with guys who can mash and put runs up on the board. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a concrete starting rotation and a deep pitching staff in that bullpen that can help take you where you need to be in case you do have any rocky starts, you're not going to get far. And for the Yankees, I think they have to be seriously considering maybe trading for an ace, or, obviously they have some good assets still left, in the minors. Do they take that opportunity to do so? We'll figure that out. But again, the teams that are getting to the World Series in these last few years have had great pitching, great bullpens, and that's what ultimately has carried them into, obviously the World Series and potentially becoming champions of Major League Baseball. And game 4 tonight, 8:00, and we'll find out if the Dodgers do take a 3-1 lead, or if the Tampa Bay Rays tie it up at 2 and then make it essentially a best of 3 game series there. But Chris, before we go into our break, I do want to get your quick opinion on this. A lot of people on Twitter, from what I was reading after game 3, were trying to argue that Mookie Betts from the Dodgers, he has supplanted Mike Trout as the league's best player. To that, what do you say?
It's tough, because I just don't think that he is better than Mike Trout, but in 3 days, he might have 2 World Series rings on his finger. So when you talk about afterwards who had the better career, I think it's pretty clearly going to be Mookie Betts, but he did get drafted to the Red Sox and traded to the Dodgers. Mike Trout, granted, he had the opportunity to leave, but he's with the Angels. So if you're just going to throw the 2 of them in the outfield and say which one is better without jerseys on, I will say Mike Trout. But at the end of the day, 10 years from now, who had the better career? I'll say Mookie Betts.
Get Mike Trout out of Anaheim, please.
He just has a 12-year contract.
He just doesn't. I mean, he can't even go to the playoffs. I don't think we'll ever see a superstar in any professional sport who will have that sort of career if Mike Trout doesn't end up going to the playoffs consistently before his career is over. I don't think we'll be able to compare him to anybody who not even getting to the postseason.
I know you're not a big hockey guy, Andrew, but we got Connor McDavid in the NHL who stuck out in Edmonton. He made the playoffs once when he was younger. He's still young. They were the 5th seed this year. They lost in the qualifying round. The team around him isn't that good, besides the MVP. The league is on his line. But other than that, they aren't that great. So I would very much compare McDavid to Trout, but to your point, McDavid's been to the playoffs twice. Trout's only been once. So you got me. It's upsetting, honestly, because also he's in LA, so the East Coast, the game started at 10:05 at night. I'm not staying up. Like, as good as Mike Trout is, I'm not going to stay up for that. So it is a shame, but I would certainly still say Trout is better.
Free Mike Trout until they free Mike Trout. And on that note, Chris, let's get off the diamond. Let's head over to the football field and get into some local New York professional football. We'll start with the New York Giants, recap Thursday night's loss to the Eagles. But again, I'm optimistic. I'm not a Giants fan. I am an Eagles fan, but Giants fans, I am optimistic for you because, as we all know, that division is nothing short of a 3-ring circus. We'll get into more of that after this break.
sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVSports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Andrew Posadas, Chris Hennessy here, welcoming you back as we cross the bottom half of the 11 o'clock hour. Back here, one-on-one, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Now, time to get into some local football. On Thursday night, the New York Giants, about as close as you can get to sealing the deal and getting their second win of the season in Philadelphia at the Link against the Eagles. But again, the New York Giants at one point up 21-10, Chris, in the fourth quarter, and a potential Evan Ingram catch from putting my Eagles away and moving on and getting their second win of the season and essentially being tied for second place there in the I can't even describe what it in the abomination that is the NFC East division. But Carson Wentz, after the turnovers he put in the hero ball that he was trying to play throughout the first three quarters, finally got it together. The Eagles scored 12 unanswered points after the Giants scored 14 unanswered on them. And for the New York Giants, again, another close loss. And Chris, Giants fans, as much as they'll be scratching their heads as to how they lost this game, as pessimistic as one might want them to be, I don't think you can really be that upset with how they played. I mean, if Evan Ingram catches that ball, we're having a completely different conversation to start this segment out.
Without a doubt. I do think that Evan Ingram, however, it being Evan Ingram, I should say, changes the conversation completely. If the catch was dropped by Darius Slayton, for example, who's been fantastic this year and has been since he was a late-round draft pick, last season or 2 years, I guess he's a second-year player now.
Yes.
That's a completely different conversation in itself. It's this guy is part of the future. He's a great wide receiver. Dan Jones likes him a lot. Whether or not Jones is the future or not, different conversation. But for now, Daniel Jones likes him a lot, and drops happen. For it to be Evan Ingram, who was drafted in the first round, tight end, early in the first round, I believe as well. It's another disaster in what has been a disastrous career for Evan Ingram. And I'm not saying he isn't talented at all. That's not. I don't want to get that confused. He's not an untalented player, but he isn't a great blocker, and he has an unbelievable case of the drops. He leads all tight ends in drops since 2017, which, okay, somebody has to lead, but he missed 16 games since 2017. So he continually shoots this team in the foot, and it's not that he isn't talented. I just think he's in a really bad place and a really tough situation with an unbelievable case of the drops. And it comes out on Thursday night, helps your Eagles win the game. But the Giants, you can blame it on Evan Ingram, and I think it's a little bit warranted. But the defense, which is supposed to be the strong suit of this team, gives up 2 touchdown drives in the last 4 or 5 minutes of the game. Make a stop, make a pick, force a fumble, tackle somebody. It was the Eagles, who were stifled from the second drive of the game till 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter, all of a sudden looked like the Super Bowl champions again. And what changed? That to me is the bigger story than Evan Ingram, is this defense, which is supposed to be good. James Bradbury's been great. Leonard Williams has been better. Blake Martinez has looked good. And all of a sudden they just fall apart. So for me, yes, Evan Ingram is a problem, but he has been forever. This defense, however, is supposed to be the strong suit of this team, and now 2 weeks in a row has given up a game-winning touchdown drive. Or 2 out of the last 3 weeks, I should say. Well, no, 3 weeks in a row has given up a potential game-winning touchdown drive to a division opponent and just got lucky against Washington.
Yeah, and I think if Giants fans could sum up their season so far through 7 games, it'll probably be that Daniel Jones potential touchdown run. I mean, he gets 80 yards, just needs the extra 11 or 12 yards to go, and he stumbles. And that's really been the Giants season. They've shown flashes where they've been competitive. They've, out of all 4 teams in the NFC East, one could argue that the Giants have played the most consistent football from week to week compared to Washington, Philadelphia, and Dallas. But again, there are stumbles and trip-ups on the way, and they've been an opportunity. You talk about that game against Chicago. They were a potential touchdown away from going to overtime. Against the Rams on the road, potentially a drive away from going into overtime, tying that game. So the Giants have been competitive in these games. Even the opener against Pittsburgh, going into that fourth quarter, it was a 1-possession game for New York against a Pittsburgh team who a lot of people think is the best team in football right now. So if you're Joe Judge, you have to be pleased by the competitiveness that your team is showing. But again, that defense, which is supposed to be the side of the football that's better right now, I mean, Carson Wentz throws that bomb. It's basically a punt to me. It's a 59-yard punt up to Hightower, and the Giants give that up. And from there, they can't do anything offensively. Daniel Jones, who had a pretty solid game, 20 of 30, 187 yards. I mentioned the rush yards, had 2 touchdowns, the 1 interception, and obviously that late fumble, that strip from Brandon Graham to seal the deal for the Eagles. And again, Daniel Jones, while I'm aware that he is turnover prone and he can do that to you, he did enough to win that game. Absolutely. I mean, he made the right throws. I mean, obviously the interception and the strip sack notwithstanding, he did enough to, using his legs, using his arm, to win that game. And if you're the Giants, considering that this division isn't going to get any better, I don't imagine that the Cowboys or the Eagles, who are the only 2 teams who have a potential to go on a run, I don't see that happening for them. So if you're the Giants, if you're Coach Joe Judge, you have to be thinking, if we can just get a few things right and play that fourth and seal deals, then we have an opportunity here to potentially win this division, when a lot of people just a few weeks ago were talking about, hey, the Giants could potentially get the number 1 pick overall. But if they string 2 or 3 victories, they could be right there and hosting a playoff game, Chris. To me, it boggles my mind, because the Giants can't go into full-on tank mode because they're still in it, whether they like it or not.
Absolutely. I think what you said there at the end, though, is really what is going to bug me about this Giants season is, well, if they could string together 3 wins, well, they should have beaten the Bears, they should have beaten the Cowboys, and they should have beaten the Eagles. There's 3 wins right there for you, Andrew. That's the difference between 1-6 and 4-3. So, and 4-3 is like, you might as well just hand in the division trophy at that point. So, so to me, this, if they don't turn this around and then win games like the Bear game, the Cowboy game, and the Eagle game, and I'm leaving out the Rams game because the offense was terrible in that game, and I didn't really have the faith in them to go and put together an 8-point possession there. If those games that happen later in the season turn around 2 victories and they're able to get to, let's say, 4-9 with a couple games to go in the season and finish 6-10, then maybe we could talk about, oh, they're right there, especially with Andy Dalton now playing for Dallas. But when we get there and they're 4-9, they're like, oh, they got to win their last 3 games to get in the playoffs. We're going to look back at the Eagle game. We're not going to look back at the Daniel Jones tripping. Stop showing it. They scored a touchdown anyways. We're going to look back at 2 consecutive touchdown drives for Carson Wentz and a drop from Evan Ingram. We're going to look back to 2 consecutive catches by Michael Gallup from Andy Dalton that won that game. And then we're going to look back at an abysmal first half against Chicago that lost them that game. So if you were able to play really consistent 60-minute football, nobody thought that this offense was going to be the Joe Montana 49ers. But the defense, especially in the Eagle game and the Cowboy game, have to put together fourth quarter possessions that help their team win the game. That, to me, is what has to change for the Giants over the next 9 games in order for them to make the playoffs. And it's crazy to say that a 1-6 team can make changes to make the playoffs. I'm sure as heck not saying that about the Jets at 0-6, but there are a couple things that it shows like they may be able to win a couple of games here in an abysmal division. They have a game each against the Cowboys, Eagles, and I almost said it, Washington football team. I had to catch myself. If they can go 3-0, they're in a good position, but I don't know if they can.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that's killing them on offense is just that lack of a rushing attack. I mean, it's been a revolving door. And you talk about Gallman and Dion Lewis. They signed Devontae Freeman off the streets. He gets hurt on Thursday night. I think that really is the one thing that messes with Daniel Jones. The fact that if I don't have a solid rushing attack to complement what I'm doing throwing the football, then the onus is now on me where I have to continue throwing it. Like I need to throw for us to be successful. And I think that's where Daniel Jones gets himself into trouble, and he's forcing things in tighter windows than he should. And that's where you're seeing the interceptions. He's holding on to the ball too long. Then that's where you're seeing the fumbles. The fact that they can't get anybody to rush the ball. And obviously you don't have Saquon Barkley. He's injured. He's gone for the rest of the year. But you can see not having that superstar in the backfield, that's incredibly detrimental to Daniel Jones and is only going to get worse if they can't establish a rushing attack. And from there, it's only going to lead to more interceptions and perhaps more turnovers from Daniel Jones' standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole defense is really offense, is really a whole domino effect, because without Saquon, Jones has to throw the ball more. And Jones has an extremely bad fumbling problem. We've seen that over his first 17, 18 games as a pro. And Andrew Thomas, the left tackle, and really the whole offensive line, I don't just want to put it on Thomas, but he is the 4th overall pick, have not been good. I can't remember the backup left tackle that they put in at the beginning of the Washington game because they punished Andrew Thomas for missing a team meeting, statistically wise, was better than Andrew Thomas. But you have to put Andrew Thomas over there, the 4th overall pick. I understand, but he hasn't been good. It add a terrible offensive line to 3 backup running backs, so you're caravanning through the middle of it. That's not going to end well. Plus a quarterback with a fumbling problem. So all of those things combined do not lead to a playoff offense. A bad offensive line, bad running backs, and a fumbling quarterback. That's not a good combination. But if you're able to get Evan Ingram back on track, you're able to have Darius Slayton and Golden Tate and Sterling Shepard play well on the outside. Honestly, they have not a terrible receiving core. Those 4 guys, that's not that bad. But everything in between the hash marks, oof.
Shaq, there's a great thing that Shaq says when there's a big man in the post on a little man, it's barbecue chicken. And Thomas was barbecue chicken on that offensive line. Every time Brandon Graham or somebody on the line was on his side, they were bull rushing him, spinning, swimming, getting him out of the way. And when you're mentioned alongside a bust that was Eric Flowers for the Giants, that is never a good thing. So if you're Andrew Thomas and the New York Giants, something's got to give, because when you're using a high first-round pick on an offensive lineman, Chris, you're expecting this guy to give you 10 to 12 years of near Pro Bowl, all-pro type of talent. That's what you're expecting out of the guy. That's the potential. And again, when defenses are strategically putting their best rushers on your rookie, saying that we don't respect him and what he can do, that is a bad sign if you're the New York Giants with the other prospects that were in there in terms of offensive linemen in the draft.
Mekhi Becton's been great. And you have
Tristan Wirfs with the Buccaneers as well.
You haven't heard a lot from Tristan Wirfs and Jedrick Wills, excuse me, my goodness, which I guess is a good thing. I think the career you're expecting is DeBrickashaw Ferguson, right? He doesn't miss a game. He goes to like a ton of Pro Bowls, is in 2 back-to-back AFC Championship games on a team that got there on the backs of an offensive line, and retires and maybe goes to Canton. So that's the career you're expecting. When you draft a guy 4th overall, and maybe the Jets got that guy, Mekhi Becton, maybe the Browns and the Buccaneers got that guy and the guys they drafted. But 6 games, now granted, it's only 7 games, but 7 games into Andrew Thomas's career, this looks to be going a lot more the direction of Eric Flowers than DeBrickashaw Ferguson. And yes, those are 2 extremes, and he'll probably end up somewhere in the middle if I had to guess, but still, it has not been pretty for him. And I mean, if you go back to the Cowboy game, Jones fumbled in that game as well, and I believe it was DeMarcus Lawrence. I could have that wrong, but I think it was him. who just literally just walks around Andrew Thomas's hip. Like he just goes right around him, and Thomas is standing like, what the heck just happened? Jones gets obliterated, drops the ball, Cowboys pick it up, touchdown. It's like, okay, well, yes, Jones has a fumbling problem, but there's a grown man running 1,000 miles an hour at his back. He has no idea he's there. Of course he's going to drop the ball. So at some point, it all comes together, and an offensive line that is so important in football. And when you have a general manager who in his intro interview said, I'm going to get the hog mollies in there, because if you remember, right before he got here, Dave Gettleman, the offensive line was abysmal, and people were blaming that on Eli Manning's drop off, even though Eli Manning was dropping off, but still the offensive line was abysmal. It was the end of the Eric Flowers era, if you will. And now, as people are calling for him to be fired, and he probably will be at the end of the season, the offensive line has not gotten that much better. So that to me is a huge marker on Dave Gettleman. And Daniel Jones' fumbling problem does need to start with Daniel Jones, but an improved offensive line can only help.
Yeah, I mean, as sick as Giants fans have to feel after that loss, I mean, there's two reasons why you should be optimistic. Think about this. Washington and Dallas are facing each other on Sunday. So one of those two teams is going to lose and keep you in the hunt for the NFC East. If they both could lose, I think that'd be even better. If we could make that happen, I'm not sure. Roger Goodell, you heard it first here. Chris Hennessy thinks two teams. If it's a tie, two teams should just lose. Why are we taking the tie? And the Eagles have a tie on there, and that should have been a loss because that was disgraceful by them against the Bengals.
It's helping, though. It's helping a lot.
It is helping. I call it disgraceful, but in about 10 weeks, I'll be talking about how that was the key to the Eagles clinching the NFC East crown. But again, we mentioned that string of wins that the Giants could potentially go on. And obviously next week, a Monday night matchup with the Buccaneers, which feels like that might just be a catastrophic blowout for the Giants. But after that, at Washington, they host the Eagles, and then they're at Cincinnati. So those 3 games after Tampa Bay, Chris, that potentially right there, those are 3 winnable games if you're the Giants. And if you win at least 2 out of those 3 games, you will probably find yourself in second place with maybe a game or 2 out of first place in the NFC East.
Yeah, you definitely look at the Cincinnati game as a huge up for the Giants. Yes, the whole division plays against Cincinnati, but they're going to have to win games outside of this division to compete. You look at the Cowboys beat Atlanta, and the Eagles beat San Francisco. So now you, the Giants, if you're going to get back into this division, you're going to have to win games outside the division because you only have 3 games left inside. So those games outside the division are the Buccaneers lost, Bengals maybe, Seahawks lost, Cardinals lost, Browns, Ravens lost. So you're going to have to beat the Bengals and the Browns in order to even be close, and that puts you at 6 wins. So to me, I do think the Giants are they're not out of it, of course, but I think that their percentage to win it went way down with that loss on Thursday.
Listen, Giants fans, have no fear that this division might be the worst division we've ever seen in the history of the NFL. So if that is the case, you just have to be optimistic that if you can string just a couple of wins, you'll be right in there, because it feels like it's going to take 7-9, 6-8-1. That might be what wins this division. So the fat lady hasn't yet sung for Giants fans, but unfortunately, the fat lady has already sung and probably done 2 encores for the New York Jets. And after our next break, Chris and I will discuss that. And Jets fan also, Michael Legan, will come in, give his 2 cents. And again, this will be a space safe in this next segment. We're going to break it down. We're going to put Michael and Chris on the proverbial therapist couch, and I will get you guys through this. And we'll talk all things New York Jets as they enter their matchup Sunday against the Buffalo Bills after this break here on One on One.
Be sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVSports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org.
We are now coming up to the midnight hour here on One. Andrew Posadas, Chris Hennessy, taking you along for the ride for the next 2 hours or so until 2 when we have to say goodbye. I want to welcome in now Michael Egan, who will be giving us headlines a little bit later on in the next 2 hours. But for now, I have to bring him in because, listen, guys, this will be my little soliloquy to start this segment. In the last several weeks, watching One or watching our Wednesday edition of One or the NFL Friday podcast, I keep seeing just one major trend, and that's the fact that a majority of our coworkers here in the sports section at WFUV are unfortunately Jets fans. And each and every week, and the last 2 weeks I haven't been on the show, so I've had a bird's eye view to watch it, listen it, and I've just heard just nothing but vitriol and disappointment and sorrow and essentially despair coming from my constituents, my friends, people that I care about. So I figure, I can be, I'm objective. I am not a Jets fan, so I don't know what they're feeling. So I need to know. So that's why I'm bringing Chris and Michael in now. The Jets, as we know, they are 0-6. Adam Gase, that whole offense, the old defense, everything just seems like a big soap opera with drama. And now they have to face the Buffalo Bills tomorrow afternoon. Nick DeLuca's Buffalo Bills, who have lost 2 straight, and I'm sure are licking their chops to get back on the right track against the Jets there in MetLife. But guys, Chris, I'll start with you. The New York Jets coming into tomorrow's game, they will be more healthier than they have been going into games this season. And while that might not mean much, I have to bring that up. You're going to get Sam Darnold back, Mekhi Becton, Denzel Mims. You have guys who are expected back. So, Chris, what are you expecting from a bit healthier Jets team against a Buffalo Bills team that right now has been struggling the last couple weeks?
Well, I'm not expecting much, to say the least. So what hurts about the Jets the most, Andrew, and I think Mike would agree, but I don't know, is, yes, 0-6 is terrible, right? We all know that. 0-6 is bad. They've lost every game by double digits. They haven't, if you're into the Vegas numbers, they haven't covered the spread one single time. They have been terrible. There's only been one game, Denver and Buffalo, where they could have maybe tied the game in the second half, but they didn't, of course. And yes, they've been hurt. But the thing that hurts the most, the thing that makes me turn off the television set at like 1:23 p.m. is that there's nothing on this team that makes me excited for next year. Being a sports fan is the long game, right? From the day I was born, it's Yankees, Islanders, and Jets. Okay, fine. I've watched Islander seasons that have been terrible, but John Tavares was there. There's hope for the future. There's a draft pick coming up. And yes, I know there's a draft pick coming up for the Jets, but there's hope for the future. They show you some things. You look at the Yankee seasons between 2012 and 2016, it's like, oh, all these young guys are coming up. Aaron Judge is coming up. Gary Sanchez, Greg Burt, Gleyber Torres. All these guys are coming up. They look really good. The Jets are so bad that there are about 3 players on this team that will be on the team for the foreseeable future with good cause. Mekhi Becton, Denzel Mims. I take it back. There's only 2. Those are the only 2. And we haven't even seen Denzel Mims play. There's literally no reason to watch the game on Sunday. Literally. The quarterback is gone. The coach is gone. The GM stinks out loud. The first round pick can't not get hurt. The second round pick can't get on the field. The third round pick can't get on the field. The fourth round pick is a freaking quarterback who was still on the practice squad when the starting quarterback got hurt. 2 of their best players are gone and both going to the playoffs. The coach is the worst coach in the history of anything. There's no reason to watch the team. There's no silver lining. They just suck.
Mike, the floor is yours.
So I think Chris brought up a lot of fair arguments, and I definitely agree with a lot of what he said. I would bump up the number of players that we're going to have. I mean, look, the team is Chris is totally right on. I totally agree. The roster's terrible. This is without a doubt, I've been 21 years on this earth. Let's say as soon as I can remember the Jets, probably the Favre season is the earliest one I can remember. This is without a doubt the worst Jet team I've ever seen. Worse than Rex's last year, worse than Todd Bowles' last year. This team is atrocious. Now, Chris, you forgot the best player on the team, which is Braden Mann, our punter. He will be coming back next year. So we got to give him some credit. I mean, that was a good draft pick. So him, Becton, he's been hurt, obviously. I've been very impressed with him. So hopefully, and that's just another atrocity with this organization. The fact that Denver game a few weeks ago, the man was hurt. He could barely move his arm, but they activated him for the game and they put him in there when someone else got hurt. And then he just further aggravated his injury. It's a joke, but that's another issue. So I would agree that Becton, Mims, like you said, we haven't seen him play. And what's more frustrating about Denzel Mims, and look, I'm not going to come out here and bash Joe Douglas 100% like you would. I know we've kind of had our discussions before over Twitter about our assessment of Joe Douglas, so I'm going to hold off a little bit on that. But what's frustrating about Denzel Mims is going into this draft, this 2020 draft class, all the talk was this is the most stacked draft year for wide receivers. And who do the Jets get? The one guy that can't get on the field. It's terrible. I don't care that Jordan Jenkins and Sam Darnold would come up to the podium after practice and saying, he made some great catches today in practice. Like Allen Iverson said, we're talking about practice, not a game, practice. And that's the biggest problem with the Jets. You hear the same thing at Adam Gase that, we're winning at practice. Practice means nothing. You got to win on Sundays. This is a joke. So, but anyway, Denzel Mims hopefully can debut this Sunday. I'd like to see him, but it's more frustrating with him, not only that he's been hurt, but that the fact that you have these other wide receivers balling out in this draft class that have been so great. So overall, I agree with what Chris is saying. It's tough to watch this team. I'll say this, look, I think we all agree that Adam Gase is going to be gone. I'm terrified because the Jets, and it's Christopher Johnson now, that we're going to have a Hugh Jackson situation where this guy's going to go we got one win this year and he'll come back. I'm terrified that that's going to happen. But let's just assume and hope and pray that Christopher Johnson will make the right move and Gase will be gone. Is Darnold probably gone? Yes, he is. If the Jets get number one pick, you got to take Trevor Lawrence. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But I'll say this. As long as Darnold's here, look, I've been rooting for this kid since day one. He's not really a kid, but he's basically my age. I've been rooting for this guy since he's been here. He carries himself in the right way. He wants to win. He's a class act. I think the talent is there. Unfortunately, I think the Jets have kind of run him into the ground. Excuse me. So as long as he's here, I'm going to root for him. And at the end of the day, if the Jets get the chance to take Trevor Lawrence, I want Trevor Lawrence, but I'm going to keep watching Sam. I'm going to keep rooting for him.
I agree with you 100%. I want nothing more for Darnold than for him to go to Pittsburgh or Indianapolis or New Orleans and win a Super Bowl and be great, because he's been as good as you can ask him to be. There was a stat, and I don't have it updated, although they scored 0 points, so I could probably do the math. In the Adam Gase games without Darnold, so the Luke Falk game against New England, all the Joe Flacco games, the Trevor Siemian game on Monday night, before the Miami game, they averaged 8.8 points per game in those games. So then if you take in the 0 points, it's less than that, obviously. So the problem clearly is not Sam Darnold. And I think you hit on something that's very interesting there, Mike, is how am I supposed to trust? And Andrew, I want you to answer this question for me because you are looking from the outside in. And maybe I'm just being too pessimistic. How am I supposed to trust a GM that was hired by Adam Gase and an owner who doesn't know what football is to fire him? How am I supposed to trust them to do that? Because the roster is terrible. The GM is making moves trying to lose football games. You cannot convince me otherwise. The general manager is making moves to try to lose football games. So he's going to give them the benefit of the doubt at the end of the season. This roster was terrible, but you, Adam Gase, you are an offensive genius. So I'm not totally convinced that he is going to get fired at the bye week or at the end of the season because Joe Douglas is going to make the excuse to Christopher Johnson, well, I got rid of our two best players. I traded Steve McClendon. Our best player was Jamison Crowder. And the team was terrible, and Adam's great because he was the one who hired me. So, Andrew, how am I supposed to trust them to fire him?
You can. I mean, the New York Jets put themselves in such a compromising situation. You cannot have your head coach give you the recommendation, say, this is the general manager you have to bring in. Now Joe Douglas, and he came from Philadelphia, so I'm very familiar with him. What can Joe Douglas do now if he goes out and goes to Christopher Johnson and says, all right, Adam's got to go? That is going to look so poor. That's a bridge burned between him and Adam Gase. They're supposedly supposed to do this together. So I have to wonder, if Adam Gase is gone, why keep Joe Douglas if that's the case? Why not just bring in a new regime? And to me, it's crazy because when you think about the start of this decade in 2010, the New York Jets went to the AFC Championship for the second straight year, lost to Pittsburgh. But again, in Rex Ryan's first 2 years, it felt like the Jets were going to go off and perhaps get to a Super Bowl and have a good decade. Where did we go wrong? And I think you have to talk to ownership and the fact that, obviously in those last few years for Rex, they didn't probably put enough around him. And maybe that's someone his as well, evaluating talent. And then Todd Bowles kind of doesn't get his fair shake, and he has to drag around a team for 4 years and he gets fired. And now Adam Gase, who basically got the job of a letter of recommendation that probably said, "Dear Christopher Johnson, Adam Gase is a good coach. Sincerely, Peyton Manning." That was probably the extent of that entire letter. But guys, it baffles me because the Giants have won a Super Bowl in this decade, and they've been pretty abysmal themselves. But where did the Jets go wrong, where everything looks so great going into 2010 and moving forward? And now we're looking at the decade at the end and just kind of disgusted as to what the Jets have done in operating this franchise.
I think
okay.
You go, Mike. You go.
All right, thanks, Chris. I would just say that, well, first off, to the Joe Douglas point, look, so obviously I'm concerned, like I said, that Gase might be here to stay. But I'm obviously, we all watched the game last Sunday against Miami. They cut up to Joe, they panned over to Joe Douglas in the box, and he had his hand over his face. He looked miserable. And look, at the end of the day, it's business. So as much as Adam Gase and Joe Douglas are friends, Douglas is going to do what he has to do to keep his job. Now, he also has like a 7-year, 5-year deal, like some crazy long deal. And the Jets, they're not going to – he's been here for one draft class. I can go back and forth to whether or not you think he's doing a good job. I mean, obviously, look, this team was not built to win. I don't think he thought this team would be as bad as it is. Obviously, it's been awful. But, I think at the end of the day, I don't think Joe Douglas is going to be like, you have to keep Adam. I think it's really going to rest in Chris's hands. And, the way that this organization is structured, it's really Gase and Douglas are essentially equals. So I think that, Christopher Johnson is really up to him. I think he's going to make the right move. And I think Douglas, at the end of the day, is going to do what's best for his job. And also, if he valued Adam Gase's friendship that much, he probably would have gone out and gotten this team some more weapons. Probably wouldn't have done a lot of the moves that he did because, look, I think going into the season, they thought they'd be better than they are. But I think after the first few weeks, Douglas has kind of transitioned into a full tank mode, as you can see by releasing Le'Veon Bell, trading Steve McClendon, all that. Now, Andrew, going back to your point about when did this all start for the Jets, it's kind of interesting to think about. So for me and Chris, I think maybe you probably agree with this, the same point. The downfall of this organization started with the hiring of John Idzik. I think you'd probably agree with that. Because to me, look, you had the 2011 season, which, they collapsed at the end. They had that Christmas game against the New York Giants, Victor Cruz, 99 yards, brutal. But, there were some highs and lows in that season. Then you're coming into 2012. And what do the Jets do? They get Tim Tebow, which is just, they could say that it was Mike Tannenbaum, whatever. That was a disgrace. So the 2012 season was just a mess. So what do the Jets do? Instead of firing Tannenbaum and Rex together, which is what they should have done, or giving Tannenbaum and Rex together another year, they fire Tannenbaum, but they force whoever the next GM is going to be to keep Rex. So that's why you get an unqualified person in John Idzik taking over. And if you look at all the draft classes, look, Rex's drafts weren't great either prior to that. But from Idzik forward, so Idzik's, McCagnon, Douglas, this team has drafted horribly. And the whole move to fire Mike Tannenbaum and hire John Idzik but keep Rex, that set the whole organization back. And that's why we are where we are, in my opinion.
I think that there's a lot of ways you could go with where did it start. Sanchez getting hurt in the preseason game, 2012. That's an interesting one. The Giants game, the Victor Cruz game, the immortal IK Enemkpale punching Geno Smith.
That was a positive.
That was a positive. You're right.
For that one season.
The immortal IK Enemkpale. Yes, I did have to look up his name, but right when it came up on my screen, I remembered how to pronounce it because quite the day. That was a positive, though. You're right. But I think it's all dominoes, right? And if the Idzik firing ends up going well and they hire the right guy to replace him, then that isn't the issue. So it's hiring Mike McCagnon. It's how terribly he drafted. But I think the one that we're going to look back on in 5 years, and maybe you're not high on this team now, I don't really know where I stand on them, but they look better than we expected them to, is hiring Matt Rule. It's not hiring Matt Rule and hiring Adam Gase. I think all of those things, right? Idzik getting fired, McCagnon getting hired, McCagnon getting fired in May, which was the stupidest thing ever. Joe Douglas getting hired. The IK and Impale punch, Sanchez playing in the preseason game, the Victor Cruz game, all of those terrible things that we've dealt with over the last decade, all could have been history if they hired the right guy in that situation, which pretty clearly now, if you look at everything that's gone on, was either Matt Rule or Cliff Kingsbury, excuse me. Now, of course, the question comes, if they hired Cliff Kingsbury, would the owners have listened to him and let them draft Kyler Murray? Probably not. But that point is different. Anyways, so I think that at the end of the day, yes, all of those things were terrible. But the crown jewel of it all is going to be watching Matt Rule specifically, because I still think Cliff Kingsbury really got the hand from Arizona that he wouldn't have gotten from New York. Specifically, Matt Rule be a great coach for Carolina and maybe other teams in the NFL for the next 2 decades, 3 decades, and have the Jets continue on this coaching carousel, knowing that they hired Adam Gase instead of him. I think that is the one that's going to hurt the most, but all of those things that we mentioned led up to that. So you can't not mention those things.
And my biggest worry here, if I were a Jets fan, is I know you guys are saying that it's an awful team and devoid of talent, but my thing is, we all thought Ryan Tannehill was garbage supreme and that he should have went back to wide receiver like he was when he was at A&M, and then he goes to Tennessee, and now people are saying that he's in the conversation for the MVP if he keeps up the play and Tennessee keeps up their pace right now. So I have to think that there is talent on this Jets team. It's just the fact that if you don't want to play for your coach, you're not going to play. And it just feels like there are guys on defense and guys on offense that are basically just folding their hands and just packing it up and just waiting for the last week of the season so that they can go back home. At some point, I just have to think that a majority of this team has given up. And then when you trade away a vet, a presence like McClendon, that's sending a sign right there. Why, if guys are seeing that someone who has done as much for the Jets as McClendon has as a player gets traded like that, and reports say that they had a car waiting for him and that he still played the game knowing he was going to be traded. When you're treating guys like that, guys who have been a staple of your locker room, I just have to think that at this point, even 7 weeks in, guys are done. They've turned it in and they've packed it up and they don't want to play for Gase anymore. And at this point, it just seems like a ticking time bomb until a player or somebody has a huge argument with Gase and the media goes all over it. And then Christopher Johnson has no choice but to make a decision and say, we have to let him go.
Well, I fully expect, without a doubt, that with Sam Darnold, because look, it's all trending towards him leaving this organization. I fully expect for him to become a star. Like, yeah, I'm just grapple with that. And that's not even just an Adam Gase thing. Look at the history of the Jets. I mean, you know, this is before our time, but if you go all the way back to the 1970s with John Riggins, the guy was on the Jets. He was an elite running back, gets traded to the Redskins, wins a Super Bowl, ends up in the Hall of Fame. You got Keyshawn Johnson. You got Darrelle Revis. You got John Abraham. You got Jonathan Vilma. All of these guys, elite talent, they leave the Jets and they go to another team and they win a Super Bowl. It is mind-bogglingly annoying. That is part of being a Jet fan, is that you either draft someone or get someone that's terrible and they're out of the league, or you get someone, they're good, you get rid of them, and then they go to win a Super Bowl with somebody else. So I fully expect Sam Darnold to go with the Steelers. Of course, it would be the Steelers because they're the best organization in sports. Go win a Super Bowl with them, replace Big Ben. It'll be like just
be
the icing on the cake.
And
then also with Gase. Go ahead, Chris.
It'll be 11 shades of Jets beautiful is when it's Steelers Seahawks in the Super Bowl next year, and Jamal Adams picks off Darnold, runs it to the house to win the Super Bowl. That's what would be like chef's kiss, just like so beautiful.
Well, I don't know about you.
Comparison with Ryan Tannehill. Obviously, the coach is the same. But if you look at the Ryan Tannehill trade, the Miami got it was in 2019, got a 2020 fourth and a 2019 seventh. And the Titans got Tannehill in a 2019 sixth, and then they re-signed Tannehill to a 1-year contract, $7 million guaranteed, then obviously re-signed him again this season. So you're looking at spending a third overall pick, trading up to the third overall pick, might I start, then spending a third overall pick on a quarterback who is good. I'm not denying that Sam Darnold is good. He is not the issue with this team. But now you're going to trade him away and try again with a number 1 overall pick and only get a 4th and a 7th back if you just look at that comp with Ryan Tannehill. So my thing is, I'm not saying that they should keep Darnold. I'm not saying that they should pass up on Trevor Lawrence. But Trevor Lawrence doesn't make this team a 10-win team. So next year, if everything in the world goes right with Eric Bieniemy and Trevor Lawrence, so realistically not with either one of them, but let's just pretend that the Jets are not cursed for 5 seconds. With Eric Bieniemy and Trevor Lawrence, they're still only going to win 4 games. This is an incredibly long game because, as you mentioned, Mike, Joe Douglas has a 6-year contract and clearly didn't care about this season. And if he did, Robbie Anderson, Jamal Adams, and Le'Veon Bell would all be on this team. He clearly doesn't believe in this quarterback. Otherwise, Le'Veon Bell and Robbie Anderson would be on this team. They're not. In the case of Anderson and Adams, they're tearing it up at other teams, and I can only imagine what Le'Veon is going to do against the Broncos this week and then against the Jets next week. But if the GM believed in this quarterback, if the GM believed in this team, they would be better than they are right now. And clearly he does not.
Yeah, again, the New York Jets, 10-point underdogs against the Buffalo Bills. And just looking through that schedule, the prospect of going 0-16 becoming increasingly more of a reality if the Jets can't come up with something. But Mike, stick around because you're going to come back with some headlines, give us the latest on what's happening across the National Football League. And we'll go from there, dive into a few topics and get into some more elaborate talk about the gridiron. But for Chris and I, we will have more NFL talk alongside Michael Egan with the headlines after this break.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. I am Michael Leakin, and I got you covered with the latest headlines. Let's start off on the gridiron, where we have a lot happening in the NFL. Late Friday night, it was announced that 7-time Pro Bowler Antonio Brown has agreed to a 1-year deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The agreement reunites Brown with Tom Brady. The two men played only 1 game together in New England, in which Brown caught 4 passes for 54 yards and a touchdown. AB is currently serving an 8-game suspension for multiple violations of the NFL personal conduct policy. He will be eligible to return starting week 9. So, Andrew and Chris, what do you guys think of this move?
Well, I mean, the rich just get richer, right, Chris? I think a lot of people thought that Antonio Brown was going to sign with the Seahawks. Obviously, in the offseason, he was practicing alongside Russell Wilson in offseason workouts. And when the news that came up, everyone thought Seattle was the front runner, was the favorite. And then out of nowhere, Tampa Bay kind of emerges as a front runner. And it's interesting, Chris, because Bruce Arians has been on the record saying that he didn't want to sign Antonio Brown. So a lot of people feel like this is Tom Brady's doing. Obviously, Tom had him in New England last season, really got along, didn't want him to leave, but obviously outside circumstances ultimately prompted the Patriots to release Brown. But again, it feels like Tom Brady went to Arians and went to management and said, hey, we need this guy. Let's get this extra piece. And when you consider that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin have been a little bit injured and hampered with injuries starting this season off, it just kind of feels like a nice little insurance policy to have. And again, you can say what you want about what he does outside and off the football field, and that's well documented. But Chris, there's no denying that when he's healthy and he's on the field, he's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and he was on his way to becoming one of the best wide receivers of all time had it not been for all the outside drama.
Without a doubt, Andrew. I think that it's a really good insurance policy for Tampa Bay, considering how injured both Evans and Godwin have been and how ineffective Gronkowski has been as well. I think that Tom Brady clearly saw something in Antonio Brown that who can't see something in Antonio Brown they like on the field when he was in New England and went to Bruce Arians. I have no doubt about that. What I find interesting, however, is he is going to have to take in this third receiver role. And yes, it's because of off the field issues, but you got to put those away now. I think it's time. All last year, 13 months ago when we were talking about, well, he's on the Raiders and the Raiders cut him, and then he's on the Patriots and then he plays a game and then they cut him. It was right in the middle of everything that was happening. And he was like, is he going to be suspended? Is he going to be kicked out of the league? Is he going what's going to happen? And it was all right in the middle of that. And the Patriots were like, we just can't have this distraction. Now that's not a distraction. It's over, right? And now, not that his personal, whatever goes on in his personal life is not existent anymore, but that immediate things that were threatening suspension that ended up, as Mike said, getting him suspended for 8 games are done. So for me, now it's just put it away and play football. And can Antonio Brown put it away and play football? Because clearly with the Raiders and the Patriots, he couldn't, or he would have stayed with those teams. So now he's got to put it away, be a second, third wide receiver option for the Buccaneers, and help them get to a Super Bowl, which is not out of the question in the NFC right now.
I would say that, Chris, I'm very concerned whether this guy can be a team player. Because, look, Antonio Brown, first of all, his off-the-field stuff, it's not even like, little ticky. It's abhorrent what he does off the field. It's disturbing the way that he treats.
I completely agree.
Yeah. So, for me, that's a huge concern. Honestly, I don't really know if he should have been allowed back in the league. They conducted that investigation in 2017 with the sexual misconduct. I guess they didn't find anything that warranted a ban. But I'm very cautious about it. But the other thing is, Antonio Brown was a member of the Steelers and the Patriots, two of the best organizations in football, world-class organizations. And he couldn't work it out with either of them. The fact that this guy could not be, he couldn't follow the Patriot way, which worked for people like Randy Moss and Gronk. And look, the simple fact of the matter is that the Aaron Hernandez, who was a horrible human being, bought into the Patriot way. And Antonio Brown couldn't do that. Aaron Hernandez is a convicted murderer, and he bought into the Patriot way. So the fact that Antonio Brown can't fit in with the Patriots or the Steelers, who have a great coach in Mike Tomlin. I'm very skeptical of how this is going to work out here in Tampa Bay. Now, you would think that it looks like Antonio Brown has a lot of respect for Tom Brady. Hopefully he gets in his ear. He'll calm down. He'll follow the rules. Bruce Arians was his offensive coordinator when AB was early in his career in Pittsburgh. So they had that relationship. I know Bruce has said some things that weren't exactly flattering towards AB. So I'm very skeptical. Maybe this will work out. But I'm sorry. I think there's a very high chance that this move, that he's off the Buccaneers by the end of the season, that he's not with the team. I'm very shocked.
I agree with you, Mike. And I think you have to put away the logo here for a second. And I understand what you mean. And you're completely right. He wasn't able to buy into Tomlin, Gruden, and Belichick last year. You have to put away the logo and think that this is the greatest quarterback of all time, plus Bruce Arians. So maybe you'll look at it a little bit differently than just he's going to Tampa Bay. He's going to two guys who are proven veterans and might be able to have the patience for him. But there is undoubtedly reason to be skeptical about his ability to stay on the field for the next 7 or 8 games. But maybe he'll be able to figure it out. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. And if he's able to figure it out and stay on the field, he's no doubt going to be a huge weapon for them.
And I would say this, Mike, that it helps his case when guys like Russell Wilson and Tom Brady are coming out and saying that they want him a part of their franchise, a part of the team, a part of the locker room. If nobody had come out on the record and said, hey, yeah, we want AB here, I don't think AB gets signed. Even if he gets cleared by the NFL, I don't think anybody even touches him with a 10-foot pole. But when you got guys like Russell Wilson and Tom Brady, two of the most respected players in the league, coming out and saying, yeah, we want Antonio Brown. We want him here so we can win. I think that boosts his case even further. And I think that's solely the main reason why the Tampa Bay Buccaneers ended up giving him a shot. And now he's back in the league.
Yeah, I think, I agree with that, Andrew. I think also that might speak a little bit to the hubris or the pride of Tom Brady and Russell. These guys, maybe they have every right to, in a sense, because of what they've accomplished, especially Brady. They might think a little much of themselves. They might think they can get him under control, but I guess we'll see what happens. So that's what's going on down in Tampa. We got some more news in the NFL. Tomorrow at 1:00, the Cleveland Browns will play host to the Las Vegas Raiders. Earlier this week, Browns QB Baker Mayfield emphasized that he and his teammates have, quote, very high expectations for ourselves, unquote. Cleveland Brown wideout Odell Beckham Jr. also made headlines this week in showing an apparent lack of caution in regard to the coronavirus, saying, quote, I don't think it's going to enter this body, unquote. So Andrew and Chris, Cleveland is currently sitting at 4-2, but with the circus that always seems to be surrounding this team, are they for real?
I'll start. I think what is going to help them this week is for the second consecutive time after they get shelled by a team that's clearly better than them, they play Cincinnati. So that'll help. For week 1, they get shelled by Baltimore. They play Cincinnati. Last week, they got crushed by Pittsburgh. Now they play Cincinnati.
Cincinnati?
It's Cincinnati. Yeah, Cincinnati. Vegas is next week. But to me, the Browns are always going to be a little bit of a PR circus because of Baker is very vocal. Beckham is very vocal. That's not a bad thing. It's just a fact. So what we have to understand is, okay, yes, they're going to be making news and saying that this loss makes them feel like they're 0-6 and they're so competitive and I have respect for the virus and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, they have to prove it against the top teams for me to believe in them. And I think with Cleveland, it's easy to shade out all the outside noise that they make themselves because they're a little bit still pretender-y to me. But for the rest of the season, they play the Ravens and the Steelers again, obviously, because they're in the division. They play the Raiders. Oh, they play the Titans, too. So that's a little bit of a tough schedule, but they got the Bengals, the Texans, the Eagles, and the Jaguars, and the Jets and the Giants on their schedule. So they're going to finish 11-5, but they could lose twice to the Steelers, twice to the Ravens, and twice to the Steelers, twice to the Ravens, and to the Titans. So to me, they're still a pretender until they win one of those remaining 3 games against Tennessee, Baltimore, or Pittsburgh.
Yeah, when you look at this team, guys, they're 4-2, but 3 of those wins are against the Bengals, against Washington, and against the Cowboys. So, I mean, obviously you can only play who's in front of you, and you got to take care of business when you're facing sub or under 500 teams and teams that are going into the tank like Washington and like Cincinnati right now. But again, this team just comes off pretenderish to me. You don't feel confident. I mean, with Baker Mayfield, there are times where, yeah, he's electric and he can make plays. But again, times where he does a little bit too much, holds on to the ball a little bit too long, makes the wrong read and is throwing picks. And then when you got a guy like OBJ, he needs to have the ball. He wants to be targeted in double digits every game. And you got to think that when he's not being targeted or when he feels like he's not getting the ball, he's saying something about it, whether it's being on camera or not. He has to be saying something in the locker room or to Baker or to the Stefanski and everybody else on that coaching staff. But again, I think with the Cleveland Browns, we are, as Chris mentioned, we're going to find out just how good this team is because they can't face anybody else in the NFC East. They face the Eagles, but that's it. They're done with the NFC East.
Well, they got the Giants.
And they can. Yeah, and the Giants as well, excuse me. And then they play the Bengals, and that's it. So after that, their schedule, there's a lot of good teams there that are going to be vying for playoff spots. So we'll find out. But again, I just think for the Browns, it all falls on, can this locker room, can all these egos coexist? And it just feels like sooner or later, somebody's going to have a problem, whether they're winning or not. Somebody's going to have a problem with something, and somebody's not going to be happy regardless of the team's success. And that kind of feels like a time bomb in itself, Mike, where if OBJ isn't happy, if Baker isn't happy, somebody's going to come out and say something. It's going to be all out in the media. And then the Browns are going to crumble because their locker room becomes divided.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, first of all, it's kind of ironic that we start off talking with Antonio Brown and to Odell, two guys who are very similar in a lot of ways in terms of great talent, but they have a lot of problems off the field. And it's very upsetting and frustrating because you get these guys, we'll talk about Odell now, who if they could just get their heads on straight, if they could just focus on the field, adopt that Jerry Rice mentality, just focus on the game. These guys could be all-time greats, and it's just so frustrating. But with the Browns, I mean, last week you have Baker Mayfield coming out of the game, you got Case Keenum coming in. They said it was because Baker was injured, was having I think it was a rib problem, if I'm not mistaken. But with Case Keenum coming in, I mean, look, Baker is, like Andrew was saying, he is very up and down. And it seems to me that I saw it on Twitter, I think it was like the Baker Mayfield cycle. He'll excuse me, the team will hype him up. He'll play terribly. He'll hype himself up. He'll play a bad team. He'll play again. And then the whole cycle will repeat, So I think Baker Mayfield is kind of in a similar position that I would say Sam Darnold is in, that Mitch Trubisky was in before he was benched for Nick Foles. We're in year 3 now for Baker Mayfield. And it's like, are you that guy that we just don't know? And, coming out of college, honestly, I wanted the Jets to draft Baker Mayfield. He was my guy. That's who I wanted. But he's just been very up and down. And you can't make the same argument that you would make with Darnold for Baker. Darnold has no weapons. He was playing in a game where Josh Malone and, Braxton Berrios are his top 2 receivers. Baker's had Jarvis and Odell for basically the whole time that he's been there. He's got, Chubb is out now, obviously. Nick Chubb, excuse me. But, got Kareem Hunt in the backfield. There's no reason why you can't make the argument that he doesn't have the weapons. So, I'm like Andrew said, I'm very skeptical whether these guys are really contenders. And I really, honestly, it's the Browns. Until the Browns prove us otherwise, this team will not make the playoffs. They have the longest drought in the league right now. So until I see it with my own eyes, I'm not going to believe them.
I think you said something interesting about Baker there, but I do want to put a little bit on the defense. They've let up over 20 points in every single game. The game they let up 20 points was to Washington. They let up 23 to the Colts, then 38, 38, 38 to the Cowboys, Steelers, and the Ravens, and 30 to Cincinnati. They've allowed more points than they've scored this season, and they've allowed the most points in the division, more than Cincinnati. So, yes, they got shelled by both Pittsburgh and Baltimore, but the defense just takes them completely out of the game, right? Yes, the offense wasn't good, but the defense puts them in this giant hole. They were down 17-0 before they could even turn around last week. So the defense needs to be a little bit better. The offense needs to compete against elite defenses for me to believe in this team.
What you got, Mike?
So I think you guys brought us some good points there with Cleveland. But our last headline for our NFL segment. So tomorrow's premier matchup in the NFL undoubtedly features the Pittsburgh Steelers traveling to Tennessee at 1 o'clock to take on the Titans. It's a matchup of 2 undefeated teams. So Andrew and Chris, are these 2 clubs the best the AFC has to offer? Are they the best the NFL has to offer right now?
Record-wise, yeah, right. Tennessee has proven that they're for real. They got to the AFC Championship last season, and now keeping that positive momentum going. Derrick Henry is literally the juggernaut. Once he gets some speed going, Josh Norman found out the hard way. You got to make business decisions. And right now, Derrick Henry has entrenched himself as the best back in football. And we mentioned Ryan Tannehill. He didn't look good in Miami, and now all of a sudden he has become one of the best quarterbacks playing right now this season. And then the Steelers, Big Ben comes back. That offense, they found Chase Claypool. Now he has emerged as a top wide receiver for them alongside Juju and Deontay Johnson and Washington. And then that defense is just hellacious. When you think about Dupree, that front line, it's hard to say. But again, Chris, are we going to put these two teams right now over a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, who are the defending champions and who we feel like at some point they're going to turn on the switch and get to the second half of the season and into the playoffs with an opportunity to repeat? I mean, I do like both teams, but again, can I put them over Kansas City? I'm not sure yet.
I can't put them over Kansas City, and I think it's because of what we've seen in the playoffs. Obviously, the Steelers were so hurt last year, so it's a little bit unfair to them to do that, but now they're out Devin Bush, which is huge. And Kansas City beat Tennessee in the playoffs, and Baltimore under Lamar Jackson has stunk in the playoffs. So for me, it's still Kansas City, and they proved that they're the belle of the ball in the AFC last year, and in the entire league. So I would still say put Kansas City above them, but the team that wins this game, which we're going to pick it later. I was about to give my pick. We're going to pick it later. So
don't spoil it, Chris.
I'm not going to spoil it. The team that wins this game is in an exceptionally good position, especially, I think, if it's Tennessee, because that, I don't want to say all but locks up because it's early, but it damn close to locks up the AFC South. Because the Colts are fine, but they're not going to beat Tennessee. So the Steelers have a tough division to play in. The Tennessee really doesn't. And Kansas City really doesn't, although they lost to Oakland last week, or Las Vegas, last week. So I think it's Kansas City still, but I'm curious to see a 6-0 or either a 6-0 or a 6-0 team going into the AFC.
Yeah, I would just quickly say that, first of all, I got a little personal interest in this game. Match up with two of my fantasy players, Derrick Henry and Juju. Juju has been pretty bad this year, especially with Chase Claypool kind of picking up those targets. But Derrick Henry is just an animal. I mean, this guy, I honestly, I feel, if you're just going pure rusher, he's the best back in the game. I mean, this guy, he is huge, and yet he can run like a 90-yard touchdown and outrun everybody. I mean, he's built like a linebacker, and he's just, you can't take him down. He's just so impressive. I would say personally to me, I question with the Steelers, look, Big Ben has been good this year. He's been better. I still question, can this guy, lead a team to the playoffs? Well, obviously they'll make the playoffs, but I mean, take him to a Super Bowl at this stage in his career. I question, the running game. They got James Conner, but is he really? He's kind of up and down at times. I was wondering maybe they actually bring back Le'Veon Bell when he hit the free agent market. Obviously that didn't happen. And then with the Titans, look, I'll actually say this right now. I honestly feel the Titans are the favorites in the AFC right now to win it. I look, Kansas City, they've been very good, but look, when they played San Diego, they should still be San Diego, Los Angeles, the Chargers, they showed some weaknesses there. And look, I'm not going to put anything past Patrick Mahomes, but, when it comes to the playoffs, the ground game, the game changes, but the ground game is still key. And I honestly, I feel the Titans could very well be the team to beat in the AFC. And if Tannehill can continue to be a reliable quarterback, they got to look at it. And it's also very weird to have the Patriots not be a real factor in the top AFC teams right now. It's very strange.
Yeah, the only matchup this week with two undefeated teams. So I'm sure all of us will be locked in to that 1:00 kickoff. Mike, appreciate the headlines for now. We will see you later on in our final hour with some more headlines. But now we will bring in former Major League Baseball umpire John Hirschbeck, who takes some time to talk to Chris and I about his time as an umpire and, of course, his current auction, The Magic of Baseball, which is running through November 14th. More with John Hirschbeck after this break here on One on One.
One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Andrew Posadas here alongside Chris Hennessy, and it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, a former Major League Baseball umpire, spent over 3 decades calling games, now retired, has a great auction going, The Magic of Baseball, from collectibleexchange.com, alongside former Mets manager Bobby Valentine. Welcoming to the show, John Hirschbeck. John, appreciate the time here on One on One.
Thanks, Andrew. It's nice to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and first of all, I'd just like to send out our regards. Hope that your family is well and safe amid the current pandemic. Obviously, 2020 has been tough on everybody. But for yourself now, having been retired since 2016, how have you been taking the last 4 years just into this new chapter of your life?
I've been enjoying the heck out of it. I really have. Kind of a true test for us is you can know, like, okay, what's your winters like? Are you busy? You know, and I always had something to do, a lot of hobbies. And so the last 4 years since retirement, I tell my friends, other than having our children, it's God's greatest gift because I'm having a ball.
Speaking of, the pandemic, obviously a very unique baseball season and postseason this year. What have you thought of the 60 games and the 16 teams? Have you been watching? And now we're a couple days away from crowning a champion here.
Well, I give Major League Baseball a lot of credit. I never thought, probably like a lot of people, that they would be able to pull it off. But they have, and some semblance of a season, which is pretty good, I think. And, kudos to them. I think it's great that it's happened for people because everyone was so hungry for baseball. It's like something in everyone's life that without it, something's, really missing. So it's been a good thing, great thing.
And John, when you think about baseball, and a lot of people want the game to be faster and they want it to progress so that it reaches out to more demographics, and you've seen some of these new rules implemented with the runner on second base going into extra innings. What do you think about the state of baseball right now as it stands?
Well, that's a tough question. I don't agree with a lot of things because I'm probably more old-fashioned. I came to the big leagues in the 80s. I went to umpiring school in minor leagues in the 70s. I think if somebody's going to watch 9 innings of baseball, it's anticlimactic to put a runner on second base and say, let's finish the game this way. If you're going to spend 3+ hours watching, may as well finish it to the end and finish it the way we've always known it. It changes everything. I mean, it really does.
It certainly does. And you worked in both the American and the National League throughout your career. And something that we saw this year as well was the addition of the designated hitter in the National League. What are your thoughts on that? Do you like it separate? Do you like them together? As somebody who literally right in front of their eyes saw them both, curious your thoughts on that.
I was always personally an anti-DH person. When I was able, my first 17 years in the American League, my second 17 where we did both, and I just think there's so much more to the game being kind of old-fashioned. I'll keep saying that, but where there's so much more managing that has to go on. There's so much more on the field. Players have to execute bunting and things like that, getting runners over. To me, there's just a lot more to the game itself without the DH.
Here talking with former MLB umpire John Hirschbeck. And John, you have said that you're old-fashioned, and I see this, and I think we see this throughout certain games where people will bring up the concept of having robot umpires because of the fact that human error and having and making sure that every call, every pitch is called correctly. To that, you say what?
Wow. And literally, wow. It's just the game has just, they're changing it so much. I can remember when it first started with calls, replay on fair foul, balls in the stands, things like, just started a little bit. And I said, look out, fellas, because once this starts, the doors open. Everyone, society is that way now, that they're going to want more and more and more. And where we had replay, and I had my last 3 years of my career, had all the replay. And now with the idea of an automated strike zone, I just don't see the game being helped out by doing that. if society has gotten that far along that we want everything to be so perfect, do I want to see a game ended on a play where an umpire misses it? No, it's our worst nightmare. So to be able to correct things like that, and I use this example. Let's say it's April and it's 15-0. My team is ahead, okay? And John Hirschbeck comes up to bat, and I had hit a ball in the infield, and it's a bang-bang play at first base. And I go to my manager like, okay, I was called out. I want to be safe. And the manager goes and looks at it. Well, what does that's because of me selfishly wanting a hit in April in a 15-0 game. I just don't see that. I really don't. But that's me.
Very interesting. You've been part of some fantastic historic games, including one of the best games, I mean, I'll speak personally, I've ever seen. Game 7, your last ever game, Game 7 of the 2016 World Series out in Cleveland. Talk to us about that game, the breaking of the 108-year streak, the Rajai Davis home run, just an absolutely crazy game that was your last game ever.
I was excited because people always say, well, in the game of baseball, professionally, my 2 greatest times ever was my first World Series, because obviously your goal in the minors is to get to the major leagues. Once you do that, your next goal is, okay, I want to work a World Series. I want that ring on my hand and know that I was good enough and chosen to do it.
You get a ring when you work a World Series?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's
beautiful
really
rings. Yes. They're really, really nice. They're not big and gaudy, I would say, like the players are, or like you've seen the NFL rings,
right?
But they're just big enough to have a little bit of bling, but they are beautiful.
That's awesome.
So that was Cleveland, which is near us here, and Atlanta, and a great honor. Then my 5th and last World Series just happened to work out where it could have been 2 greater cities, Chicago and Cleveland again. And Terry Francona has always been a dear friend of our families, and my son Michael just loved him, and they were very, very close. So it couldn't have been better. It really couldn't have. And I'll tell you one inside thing. Everybody, Cleveland people will say, well, Hirschbeck stopped the game for 17 minutes for that rain delay, if you remember, the infamous rain delay.
I remember for sure.
Yeah. But the thing is, nowadays, if you didn't have the technology, again, here I am talking about being old-fashioned more in the game, but the technology is what helped me, knowing that it was going to come. When it started, it was going to be really hard. So I was able to send word to both managers and say, listen, don't think I'm nuts. When the drops start, I'm pulling them off the field right away. It's going to be a hard burst. We can get them off and get them back on, because I also knew that in Toledo, the next front was coming through. So we had about 45 minutes after the rain delay to finish the game. And if we didn't finish, it rained all night into early the next morning. So we would have had to come back the next day. So it worked out very, very well. Somebody had to win. But the last thing I wanted to see happen was, a shortstop goes in the hole and he slips, and the World Series gets won on conditions of the field instead of the merit of the team.
John, few people understand what goes on in the mind of a Major League Baseball umpire. But luckily for you, your brother, Mark, was also an umpire, and you guys were together for, I believe, a 15-year period from 88 to 2003. Can you just talk about having most people are umpires and that's it. They're the only one in their families that's a Major League Baseball umpire. How was it having you and your brother both working in the league?
Well, first, we were the first ones, and then right after us, Bill Welke and Tim Welke, who basically came up when I did. And Tim retired when I did, and Bill's still working. But it was a great honor. I was very proud of him because, whether or not they say Hirschbeck, and I said this to Mark at the time, he was just at umpire school. I said, you're still going to have to do it on your own. I can't be there to call balls and strikes, safes and outs. You have to be able to perform at that level yourself. So I was very proud of him. I'm the oldest in the family. He's the youngest. And unfortunately had a hip injury that ended his career. But he's still doing great. I talk to him about every day. He's in Connecticut and I'm out here in Ohio. But it was great for the family. And my dad just died last year at 92. And, he was in his glory between being able to go to games, and they were in Florida in spring, and he would go with Michael and I to every game. So it's been a great family thing. Baseball has been our lives, really has been my life. I thank God every day because everything I have in life is because of baseball.
Can you talk about the experience that only a few people have, being the home plate umpire during a no-hitter? Just how much pressure, I guess the no-hitter is a little bit different than a perfect game, but how much pressure is that when you're sitting there in the 8th and 9th inning knowing that this guy is about to make history, especially the one that you called, Roy Halladay, in the playoffs? Just what are you thinking after 18, 21 outs? Like, wow, this is really about to happen.
Well, first of all, the difference between a perfect game and a no-hitter is not really in your mind because somebody walked earlier and it wasn't really didn't have anything to do with me. It was just he walked someone.
Right.
But then you go by that and you're really just thinking, I looked up after 4 innings because I thought, boy, he's got good stuff tonight. And I happened to look up at the scoreboard, looked at the crowd. Oh, they got a big crowd tonight because you're so into the game. You don't notice it until later when you're kind of relaxing between innings. But I said, oh, wow, Cincinnati doesn't have any hits yet. And then the 5th inning goes by and same thing. So at that point, I did say to myself, okay, just keep doing what you're doing. You're seeing the ball well. Take your time. Don't get caught up in the crowd. I always tell young umpires, when the volume goes up in the stadium, you have to take your internal volume and turn it down. As they go up, you have to come down and make yourself be more calm, more relaxed, more totally in control. And just went inning by inning, and whether no matter which team it was for, I just said, okay, lock in, stay the way you are, and keep working hard. Don't let this game be on me.
Mm-hmm.
Pleased to be joined by former MLB umpire John Hirschbeck. And John, I want to get this right because I'm looking here and it says that you began umpiring as a senior in high school because you were short of money to attend your prom. So you started umpiring Little League games for $5 every game. Can you just talk about how you got started and how that came about?
That was back in 1972. So the $5 wasn't that bad back then. I was a senior and wanted to go to the prom. I thought, well, if I get a job, I can make some money. And a guy in town, a small town in Connecticut, Stratford, and a man that I knew said, well, listen, we need umpires. And I was never any good at baseball. I think I stopped playing when I was 12 years old after Little League. And I'm like, all right, I'll try it. And then a week later, he called and said, well, we need an umpire in chief. I go, what's that mean? And he said, well, we need someone to schedule all the Little League games for the town. I said, well, if I'm in charge of that, can I schedule myself as much as I want? And he said, yeah. So I was making, $35 a week plus maybe double headers on the weekend, but I enjoyed it. It's like just something where God put in my life that I said, this is really a lot of fun. So next year in college, I took tests to join the local association and started doing high school ball. And I always say that people, as corny as it sounds, by my sophomore, junior year, I'm watching TV and kind of started watching umpires on games. And there weren't that many on TV back then. But I just really thought like, okay, how do they ever get to do it at that level? Someone's got to do that for a living. And I found out about umpire school. So in the middle of my senior year of college, I went down to Florida, Daytona. It was called Al Summers Umpiring School back then. And I finished second in my class out of 149 guys. And so I went back, dropped out of college for my last half semester. And I worked in the Florida State League that year and then went back in the fall and finished up college. And the rest, then I was on to the minor leagues.
Couple of Connecticut guys making it to the major leagues. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a question you answer every day, but what's the one game where you sit in retirement and you think that was my favorite game I ever worked, I was ever at, regardless of what base you were working that night?
The most amazing game, and I thought this in the League Division Series, when the Cubs were playing the Giants, Game 4, and we all assumed, I was at first base that night, between innings, second base umpire, right field umpire, and I were like meeting in the outfield saying, and I'm telling them, okay, you take care of the limo, make sure we got rooms, the plans, because it just looked like we were definitely going back. San Francisco was ahead. We were going back to Chicago for Game 5. And the Cubs came back and won that game to go on to the next to the division series, to the LCS. And that game was absolutely amazing. The Cubs coming back and how it happens. And I thought that until I got to the World Series, and then Game 7, I would say, was even more amazing. Those were two of the greatest games I've. There were a lot in my career, but those were two that were just like, wow, this is okay. I need to go home and take a break.
John, I want to get into your auction now, the Magic of Baseball, excuse me, with collectibleexchange.com. Obviously, between you and former Mets manager Bobby Valentine, and obviously this is to benefit the Magic of Michael Foundation, dedicated to your late son, Michael, and for Bobby Valentine to support the Jackie Robinson Foundation Scholarship of Sacred Heart University. So, John, can you tell us what ultimately prompted you to collaborate with Bobby to start this auction? Obviously, over 500 memorabilia pieces, a lot to auction off here. So can you just talk to us more about this auction and what ultimately prompted you to do so?
Sure. Being in Yankee Stadium as many times as I have in my life, I always saw Steiner auctions, Brandon Steiner. And I figured I knew it was a big place. I figured New York, he's a success. So when this all started, I called him. He decided to put these two together. So Bobby's is for Sacred Heart University. And I've happened over the years to know Bobby very well. But mine is for separately. So it's called the Magic of Baseball. All the proceeds from our memorabilia go to the Magic of Michael. And we started that when Michael passed away in April of 14. A couple of months later, friends of his came to us and they said, we want to do something to keep Michael's memory alive. We'd like to have a golf tournament. And from that, we had a golf tournament with a dinner. Joe Torre was one of our first guests. Jim Leland has been there another year. 2 years ago, we had Terry Francona and Jim Tomei. And it's always been like, okay, how can we raise more money? So about a year and a half ago, these things were so dear to Michael, all the memorabilia. He got a lot of things. I had tons. I told my wife, I said, this stuff isn't doing any good. My friends don't come over here to look at that stuff but we could do a lot of good with it if we auctioned it off. And so the idea came about. Very good friend of mine that I fish with a lot, Mike McCoy from Mentor, Ohio, used to come down, spend the night, and he was really into it. So he did a lot of the work. For me, it was like, oh God, he's coming again, to stay with us, and we're gonna have to work. But little by little, it came together. We categorized everything. Brandon sent a van from New York City, and they picked everything up, and away it went. So 100% of the proceeds that are raised from this go to the Magic of Michael. Can I talk about that a little bit now, or do you want to?
Absolutely, yeah.
No, absolutely. Go right ahead.
Okay. So the Magic of Michael, our motto, our theme, our mission statement is helping families endure the curveballs of life. And we have done everything. We work with Akron Children's Hospital. We've given them, since Michael passed away, $250,000. And we also help families that inner city, underprivileged children. We have different programs, after school programs where kids can go and have food, play, do homework, things like that. And then mostly the monies go to helping families with children with disabilities. We have done everything from build wheelchair ramps to electric wheelchairs. We have companion dogs for some children. We've remodeled bathrooms, pay to have bathrooms remodeled, handicap version. And just on and on and on. We have a Christmas program for kids in the hospital that are terminally ill. Santa Claus and buy gifts for the entire family. We have another program called Go Baby Go, which a vocational school, we buy the cars, and the vocational school individual for each child, they've never walked. They're 3-4 years old. They've never walked. And each car is customized for that child's disabilities. And if they even can't work the steering wheel, they remote control it where the parents can take the car out in the driveway and drive the kids move around. So a lot of different programs. We're very involved in the community. Like I said, we work hand in hand with Akron Children's Hospital, and no one on the Magic of Michael gets paid. Our daughter Erin is the president of it. She lives here in this area, and all the money goes to the kids.
That's amazing stuff. Where can people help out, get information about the events and the auction and all of that?
I'm glad you asked. All they have to do is go to magicofmichael.com. There's actually a link to get onto the auction. What I would really encourage people to do that are watching this or hear this is go to the magicofmichael.com. You'll see pictures. You'll see articles down at the bottom. If it says related articles, there's one story by Lisa Pollock, who won the Pulitzer Prize. It's called The Umpire's Sons. You'll learn a lot more about the disease, about our family, things that have gone on throughout my career since John passed in '93. And it will be very informative. I think once they see it, they'll go, wow, these people are doing a lot of good. And I think we are.
Yeah, I'm on this website right now. There's some amazing pictures, some great auction items. So definitely go check it out.
Yep.
And again, that is the Magic of Baseball auction. You can check it out, collectibleexchange.com, over 500 memorabilia pieces. And obviously, as John mentioned, to benefit the Magic of Michael Foundation, and the auction block runs through November 14th. But John, we really appreciate you taking the time here to join us on One-on-One.
Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure and honor to be on the show with you. And thanks for helping me to get the word out about this.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
We are back here on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I am Michael Legan, and once again, I have the latest headlines from the world of sports. Let's move to the hardwood, where we have some basketball news to get to. First off, it was announced Friday that the NBA is pursuing a pre-Christmas start date for the 2020-2021 season. The league is also looking at reducing the number of regular season games to 72, while also adding a play-in tournament for the playoffs. With these proposed changes, players only have about 10 weeks off before the season starts, half the time they usually have. Andrew and Chris, your thoughts on these proposed schedule changes?
Well, Chris, I can't blame the NBA for trying to see if they can move up the start. I mean, obviously, the main priority for them is trying to get back to that October to June type schedule. But, with the current coronavirus pandemic, that might not be feasible for another year. So, at this point, if that's not going to happen going into this next season, you got to have thoughts about, can we start it in December or in January? A few weeks ago, we had heard that Adam Silver said maybe February or March. But now, as Shams Charania had tweeted out yesterday, NBA league officials informed the Board of Governors that the projected value for teams and players with a December 22nd start versus later is more than $500 million. So I think at the end of the day, they know that fans aren't going to be there, but considering these TV deals and sponsorship deals, there's still a lot of money there for the NBA to have, and being in the bubble saved them money. So at the end of the day, I don't think the NBA really loses anything by starting a bit earlier. And the fact that they can start at December 26th and then have that Christmas Day showcase, I think that's important, because I think that'll really set off the season properly, where those TV ratings that they saw go down in the bubble will slowly pick back up, starting with Christmas Day.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that starting a couple days before Christmas is great, because that's become a staple. That's become what football is to Thanksgiving almost, on December 25th. And it was interesting to me that a priority for them was to end before the Summer Olympics, which will be in mid-July. I guess that makes sense, because obviously basketball is a Summer Olympic sport, but I would have never thought that the NBA would prioritize that, but they have. So I think that's part of the decision as well. You mentioned the money, but part of the decision to start so soon, as Mike mentioned, only 10 weeks off, is to try to get all those players to finish the NBA season, then on planes to Japan to compete in the Olympics. I am curious to see how many NBA players actually go to the Olympics. If all of this is seen out, right? We play 72 games, we get a new champion in July. How many players then pack their bags and go a week or two later to participate in the Olympics? That's going to be very interesting to me. Like, if the Lakers make another deep run, LeBron, and even if they don't win a championship, they just get to the NBA Finals, is LeBron really going to go to the Olympics after two extremely long seasons with a shorter off season? I don't know. So we're going to see how much of a priority that really is. But all in all, I think it's a really solid move. So now you have the NBA targeting the 22nd, the NHL targeting January 1st. So both leagues that ended so well in the bubble are now picking start dates that allow them to have a longer season, which is obviously what the television want, what the television contract needs, and what the teams want as well. So all in all, I like what I've seen from the NBA so far.
Yeah, I would say that, with the prioritizing the Olympics, I think we saw, for all of us that watched The Last Dance, which I think pretty much everyone did, talked about how that 92 Dream Team kind of helped expand the game globally. Now, obviously, we're way past that. The game is pretty global, but every year that you have the Olympics, or every 4 years when it happens, when you get those NBA players going, kind of traveling around the world, you got guys playing for other countries too, which is really great. I think, it always kind of helps expand the global brand of the NBA, which I think the league is not going to pass up. And I think it's a little different than the NHL, because, the NHL is very skeptical because players getting hurt and all that. But I think the NBA, they're willing to risk the injuries because they know that it can have a big impact on like advertising and getting guys, kind of expanding the brand even more. I would say that
I agree with you that the Olympics is important, but what I'm curious to see is how many players actually go. Like, they're saying they prioritize the Olympics for the right reason, but are the players actually going to go like 2 weeks after the season?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a valid concern. I mean, look, if I'm LeBron James at this stage of my career, like an Olympic gold medal is not going to help me. It's all about the titles. So I think, it might depend on, where you exit in the playoffs. If your team make the playoffs, that might have something to do with the player willing to go. But the thing that really interests me about this proposed change is the idea of a play-in tournament. And I think that it kind of shows that the league is really looking at what happened down at the bubble and kind of incorporating the best elements, so to say. And even though it wasn't really an official kind of play-in tournament, those first few weeks of the bubble where you had like the Suns going on that like 8-0 run where they won all those games trying to get right in, the Blazers were right there. The Pelicans, didn't really work out, but that build up to the playoffs, honestly, in my opinion, the Nets, going out there, that build up honestly was just as good to me as any of the actual playoff games. I mean, like, there were stakes in a regular season game that we hadn't really seen before in terms of the play-in scenarios. It was a lot like the NFL, really, with all these different, or Major League Baseball, where the season comes down to the wire and this team has to win to help this team. I mean, that was very entertaining. So honestly, the idea of adding a play-in tournament, I think, is a really great idea because it kind of incorporates all of the best parts of the bubble. I mean, they're not going to play in a bubble again. Obviously, maybe they will in the playoffs. Hopefully, by the time the NBA playoffs come back, maybe we can kind of return to more normalcy in our society. But yeah, I like the idea of a tournament.
Yeah, I mean, the play-in tournament is, I mean, we're seeing all these professional sports leagues now expand their playoffs. And I think the NBA probably has the best expanded playoff, if you might call it that, being a play-in game. Obviously, you don't want, more than half of your league to be in the postseason because you'll see some of those lower records. But again, I think in the NBA, you want those seeds 8 to 10. You want to give those 3 teams a chance to somehow make it. And if you're 2 games back, if that's the magic number and you're just 2 games back, I think that does call for a play-in series where you can have some extra fireworks and then, just some extra national broadcasts, put some of these teams like Memphis, teams that aren't on national broadcast throughout the season, give them some shine and have that kind of like that NCAA tournament feel with the first 4. And a lot of times we see those teams in the first 4 win a couple of games in the tournament. So I think that's what the NBA is trying to do and give some of those teams, those underdogs, a shot. My thing, though, is, guys, fans in the arenas. Now, obviously here in New York, we probably won't see that at Barclays or MSG. But when you think of states like Texas, like Florida, who are trying to reopen bars and restaurants or in phase 3, what's going to happen when certain teams propose to the NBA that, hey, can we have 25% capacity? It's an indoor arena. I mean, with the ventilation systems, the roof is closed. Chris, I just don't know how they go about teetering that line of, all right, should we bring fans back in a limited capacity for certain teams? What does that do for a home court advantage? What doesn't it do? And what are the potential downfalls for allowing fans back in the stands in indoor basketball arenas, especially if they aren't being tested or checked at the door before allowed in?
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing about the play-in before I get to that. Don't make it possible for a team to go 8-0 and not make the playoffs, because I'm still trying to figure out the math on that one. I just don't understand how the Suns were allowed to go to the bubble if they weren't going to make the playoffs anyways. That's not the point. Fans in the stands. I think that basketball and hockey are going to have different issues with it than baseball and
Football.
Because obviously they have the ability to be outdoors. Now, not every baseball stadium or football stadium are outdoors. And you look at a team, let's take the New Orleans Saints, for example. The Saints are in Louisiana, and they want to have fans in the stands. And the mayor of the city of New Orleans has told them repeatedly, no, you cannot, because the Superdome is a closed building with no ability to retract the roof. So there was a rumor that the Saints were then speaking to the city of Baton Rouge to potentially play games at LSU, to have fans. I don't really know how true that was. There wasn't really much of a follow-up there, but how maybe not how true it was, how realistic it was, I should say, because there wasn't much of a follow-up. So you've already seen issues with having fans inside of the stands. Now, if you look at Friday night's game, World Series game, MLB went through it and said, if we close the roof to Arlington Park and where the Rangers play, it will still be safe for fans to be here because of XYZ ventilation. They're separate. They're all wearing masks, yada, yada, yada. So the NBA needs to adapt the same protocols as what the MLB has in Arlington. Maybe there's been a lot of hate towards the Arlington Park, the actual baseball part of it, and I understand. But the fact that they were able to have the roof closed and MLB said, like, yes, this is okay, and there were health officials that checked it off and said, like, this is acceptable to have 11,000 people in this enclosed arena, it's probably not going to be 11,000 because how much smaller, right, is it in Brooklyn than it is at a baseball stadium? But those are the kind of protocols they're going to have to meet in order to have fans in the stands. Personally, I just don't see it happening, especially look at how close you are in basketball. They're going to have to block out a ways up because of how close they are to the players. I don't see a lot of arenas having fans, but I guess it's possible that, we see a Mavericks game with 5,000 people there because they've been able to adapt that arena to the ventilation standard.
My biggest thing with the fans is that, I think the NBA, and I really give kudos to them for this, has shown that they're the league that takes the virus probably the most seriously, which I really appreciate. I mean, obviously went to the bubble, and I could tell that there's the Adam Silver. I mean, they did that shutdown as soon as Rudy Gobert had tested positive. I feel like the NFL and what I like about the NBA is they've been very centralized. It's like I, the commissioner, Adam Silver, are going to tell you, I don't really care what your state says. This is how we're going to run to keep it consistent. What I don't really like is how in the NFL, it's kind of been like, well, in your state, we can do this and that. And I don't really like, it's kind of like a murky situation. I like consistency. And so same thing with baseball. And I just feel that, look, I would hope that by the time, and, we're going to see, obviously, because we can have the flu at the time and hopefully get a vaccine. I would hope by a certain point in the spring, hopefully, or before the playoffs start, that, maybe we can get enough people vaccinated, or we can be more back to normal, and then we don't have to worry as much about letting fans in. I mean, obviously, it wouldn't be full capacity, but there could be just the added sense of comfort. To me, when it comes to fans in the stands, I mean, I understand that it's great to have fans there, and fans make the experience. I mean, like, I've been watching some old highlights, because Doc Emmerich recently retired, and I was watching some old Devils calls, and it was just like so weird seeing all these fans like cheering, getting so excited. Like, you forget how much of a part of the game they really are. But for me, like, when it comes to, especially with the indoor, with the NBA, it just, to me, I understand it's not about money at the end of the day, but it's just like an added unnecessary risk. It's just so unnecessary. At the end of the day, the argument for having them in is money. And if that's what we're really coming down to, we're prioritizing money over people's health and well-being. And I understand the risk if you're going to space them out. It's not going to be that great. But to me, I'm just someone that just wants to be very cautious with this, and who knows. But the other thing that I want to take out of this is that the 10-week waiting period, that essentially the rest for players is cut in half. And I don't know about you guys, but to me, forget about the Olympics on the back end. This shortened, these guys basically played 365 days a season, essentially. I mean, they have that rest in the middle, but I'm a little concerned and worried to see how the injuries are going to play out with this short rest period.
Yeah, I mean, for somebody like LeBron James, I'm sure he's not going to be too pleased with that type of schedule, considering he's going on, 36, 37 years of age. But no, with the fans, I imagine that Adam Silver and the NBA won't have fans to start if they do indeed start on December 22nd. But I have to imagine that, 2 months in, sometime in February or maybe March, there are going to be teams inquiring about potentially having a limited capacity. And if you're Adam Silver, that's going to be a long bridge that you're going to have to cross. And a lot of things going to be a small margin of error, Mike, when it comes to deciding whether fans should be able to be in indoor arenas. But I know that you also have some local news for us regarding the Brooklyn Nets.
That's right, Andrew. So in local NBA news, The Athletic reported yesterday on Friday that former Knick Amari Stoudemire will be joining Steve Nash's Brooklyn Nets coaching staff. Nash and Stoudemire were, of course, teammates on the Suns for many years and during their respective playing days. So, guys, what do you think of Nash's decision to add Amari to his staff?
Chris?
Well, if you listen to Kyrie Irving, he's added another head coach. I don't know if you guys saw that, but he basically said that it's a platoon at head coach, and that anybody at any given day could be the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. I think it's interesting. Obviously, he's friendly with Steve Nash in their days in Phoenix. We are familiar with Amari Stoudemire here for his time in the blue and orange, but at the end of the day, I don't think that we can really deliver a Nets take until we see Durant and Irving on the court at the same time. I just think that this team is so reliant on two stars. They've proven that by hiring a coach that clearly Kevin Durant helped pick, or if not picked himself completely. And we haven't seen them on the court at the same time. We haven't seen Kevin Durant at all in Brooklyn colors. So it'll all be determined to me based on how they play together. If they're top 5, top 4 in the Eastern Conference, then I will say that it's a success. It's a success, excuse me. But that should be the level for them. Like, they should be better than Philadelphia. Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Boston, Brooklyn. That should be the Eastern, and Miami. That should be the Eastern Conference. Don't go out and lose to Orlando. Don't, you got to compete, because this window is small with these short contracts for Durant and Irving. So the Amari hire doesn't move the needle for me, Andrew, because it's going to be all about how they play.
The pressure right now, to me, is on Jacques Vaughn. He stayed on as an assistant, and I believe he's the highest paid assistant now. But think about this. His coaching staff, the head coach is basically a rookie. I mean, obviously, Steve Nash, one of the best point guards of his generation, and somebody whose IQ can't be questioned. And now you bring in him and Amari Stoudemire, who now has to kind of be, he has never been a coach. He was playing in Israel after, his time in the NBA, stopped with the injuries. But now, if you're Jacques Vaughn, you kind of have to babysit both of these guys and make sure, all right, I have to make sure that Steve's in a great position to lead this team as the head coach, I also have to bring along Amari, develop him so that he could be the best assistant coach that the staff needs, because Amari is going to be focused on player development from what's been reported. So if you're Jacque Vaughn, you're kind of the head coach here. I mean, it isn't official, but I believe it'll all fall on him. And if this season doesn't go the way a la Steve Kerr that first season with the Warriors, when they just burst onto the scene and Steve was able to coast and take them to the finals, if that doesn't happen, I mean, Jacque Vaughn could easily either find himself in a position where people are saying maybe we should bring him back to be the head coach, or perhaps if things don't go right, Jacque Vaughn could find himself out of a job because people will be wondering what happened. They'll clean off that entire coaching staff slate. But again, KD and Kyrie got exactly what they wanted. They got exactly who they wanted. And now there's no more excuses, nothing else. As long as everybody's healthy, Mike, this is a team that should be contending for the East and should be a favorite to get to the finals. And I was there at Kenny Atkinson's last game earlier this year against the Spurs when Karis LeVert dropped a triple-double and he got fired the next day. And now Kenny Atkinson goes to the Clippers with Ty Lue. So if you're the Nets, all these moves you've made, they better not come in vain, because you had a guy that a lot of people love as a head coach, and he's gone as an assistant now and hopefully looking for a gig down the line. But Mike, if you're the Nets, there are no excuses. If they are healthy, this is a team whose expectations will be just as high as the Lakers, the Clippers, and all the other favorites in the NBA.
Yeah, when it comes to the Nets coaching staff, and I think that the Amari move, I kind of hold in the same light as Steve Nash. I think I'm very concerned about Kyrie, especially after those comments he made, and Kevin Durant respecting and listening to Steve Nash and Amari. I just feel that, look, they're obviously both great players. Steve Nash is a Hall of Fame player, but like, I'm worried that they might not show them the respect to always listen to them. And, that whole comment about like everyone's a coach, like that's very concerning. I'm just, look, obviously in the NBA, it's very different than other leagues. It's really a players league, and the coaches are really there to facilitate, and they're not going to coach you hard like a Bill Belichick. I'm not saying they're going to do their job, they're going to coach, but it's just like a different relationship. But, to me, this all just reminds me of when Jason Kidd became the coach back when they had Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett and, Joe Johnson and all that. And it's just, I'm very concerned, especially with, if we're being perfectly honest, Kevin Durant and Kyrie have kind of volatile personalities. I'm worried that this is not going to work out. And honestly, for Amari, I'm happy for the guy, but I don't know if the person who punched a fire extinguisher and broke his hand on some shattered, like got his hand cut up on shattered glass in the playoffs because he was angry. I don't know if that's really like the best temperament to have for a coach, especially one that's going to be around Kyrie and Kevin Durant.
I think your comparison to the Garnett era in Brooklyn is a little bit off base, just because of how much more talented this roster is. Not only just Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce at that point against Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving at this point, clearly more talented. But below that, Sean Marks has created a nice roster with Karis LeVert and Spencer Dinwiddie, and DeAndre Jordan played decently well last year. And just created a nice roster there. So it'll be interesting to see how Steve Nash does, but we're seeing a lot more of the players coach type in the NBA, which was exactly the kind of hire that Steve Nash was, exactly the kind of hire that Amari Stoudemire is. And it's probably why Jacque Vaughn didn't get the head coaching job, because after Atkinson was fired, there wasn't much basketball, but Vaughn coached pretty well. So usually he would get that job, but he doesn't, because Durant and Kyrie like Steve Nash, and that's fine. But we're going to have to see how it goes. And I think it's all going to come onto Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, because they were the ones who helped pick the coach. They were the ones who came into Brooklyn with all these expectations. So at the end of the day, we can't blame it on Steve Nash or Amari Stoudemire or Jacque Vaughn if this team doesn't get to the Eastern Conference Finals or to the NBA Finals. That has to fall on the players.
Yeah, Mike, and I would say this. I don't want to hear anybody talking about LeBron James being the coach of his team and handpicking guys to kind of just, stay there in the background while he drives them to the NBA Finals. If you're going to say that about LeBron, keep that energy for KD and for Kyrie, because they are literally flat out saying that they could win with anybody and that the head coach doesn't matter. So if we're going to criticize LeBron James for handpicking and selecting coaches that will acquiesce to him and how he plays, we're going to have to hold KD and Kyrie accountable if Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire and this coaching staff doesn't pan out.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think that, with it just I would level that same heat against Katie and Kyrie too. I think they need to be called out on that. And I just think that, in terms of the Brooklyn Nets thing, Chris, I see what you're saying, but to me, when I'm talking about KG and Paul Pierce, even though the talent may not have been there, to me, it's about the personalities. That's what matters. And even though Paul Pierce and KG were past their primes, in their heads, they were still thinking themselves as elite players and still kind of thought of themselves as like people that, why are we listening to this guy? So that's what I'm a little concerned about.
Yeah, and again, the Brooklyn Nets will, without a doubt, be one of the most intriguing covers in the NBA coming into next season. And we'll see where they go from there, but they should be a prohibitive favorite. Mike, appreciate the headlines. Once again, we will see you later on towards the end of the show in our Pick'em segment, in our Who You Got, when we all make some winners out of the people listening right now. But first, we did mention fans in the stands and the NBA not having them. Well, there are fans in the stands in college football, in the NFL, and most recently now in Major League Baseball. And one question that comes to mind, do we really need fans in the stands? Chris and I will break that down and answer that question right here on One on One.
WFUV is the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. One-on-one, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Pleased you can be joining us back here in our final hour as we count down to 2 o'clock when we unfortunately have to say goodbye. Andrew Posadas, Chris Hennessy here, taking you along for the last half an hour of this show. And Chris, before the break, we mentioned it slightly with the perspective of fans in the stands in the NBA for the 2020-2021 season. This is a topic that I really wanted to get to, that broad aspect of fans in the stands. And if we really do need them, because as our producer, Alex Walls, know, we recorded our podcast for the sports section of the Fordham Ram earlier this week. And we had that as one of our main topics. And I wrote about it in my column this week for Beyond the Scoreboard. And for me, Chris, it's tough because we want things to go back to normal. And normalcy is exactly what everyone needs. And I understand that sports fans are exhausted. They don't want to be in front of their televisions anymore watching games. A lot of diehard fans, they want to be in that in-game atmosphere, be there in person, because obviously, as we know, covering it and going to games as fans, it's a completely different experience. But when you look at college football and the NFL, and when you look at these broadcasts, you are seeing people blatantly break health and safety protocols where their masks aren't on at all times. People are not socially distanced with the other groups around them. People are celebrating together, high-fiving, hugging, and acting like if nothing is wrong. And then in the Eagles game last week against the Baltimore Ravens, you even had fans fighting and taking the opportunity to not only break social distancing, but to just try and beat each other up for no apparent reason, which makes obviously no sense to me. But again, and then we see it in college football where the student sections of these arenas, like the University of Georgia, at Texas A&M. We heard what Dan Mullen said at Florida, wanting to pack out the swamp, and then subsequently getting COVID, and a majority of his players and fans getting COVID after that game in which they lost to A&M. But again,
with everything going on, I just don't see why we didn't just give the proverbial punt on fans in the stands. I know the money there in stadium and the revenue generated from fans, but Chris, at the end of the day, what's it worth to have fans in the stands when these fans aren't being tested for COVID and they're literally going into what are those things, that signs that you put on the I'm losing it right now.
Well, too. Yeah.
Yes, that's what it's an experimental test tube of people together, and whatever happens happens, because again, the players, coaches, those who work at the stadium, officials, they're all being tested daily, but the fans who are entering these stadiums and these arenas aren't. So I just have to wonder, is it really worth it in the grand scheme of things?
I first want to start off by saying we are going to discuss this, but you should still go read Andrew's piece. It's a good time. And listen to the podcast, of course. So I think what you say is correct in terms of college football. What we've seen from college football, and specifically the SEC, but Clemson and Notre Dame and the ACC have fans, NC State, all the teams in the ACC as well, it's been nothing short of immature. I mean, you look at schools across the country who have had to close and send all their kids home because they couldn't control the virus, but now Texas A&M is going to let that was an unbelievable amount of people in the stands. Texas A&M, Florida. I don't know if you watched that game, but wow, that was a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I do think that it's immature. I do think that we're going to get to a breaking point where they're just going to have to limit the tickets and stop giving them out, but we shouldn't have to get to that point. I think that I didn't love the idea of having fans at the World Series and the NLCS, because to me, it breaks the idea of a bubble. Right, because that's the point of the MLE playoffs, is to bubble the players, but you're bringing fans in, therefore it's not a bubble anymore. It's a whole just wishy-washiness from Manfred and MLB, but that's worked out decently well. They're very far apart. That's a huge park, and there's a lot of people there, but they're very, very far apart. So it's been okay. For college football, on the other hand, it's been pretty much a disaster. And I'm going to include the Dallas Cowboys tonight, who have 25,000 people.
Over 25,000 people going to their games.
Yeah, so I'm going to include the Dallas Cowboys and the college football, because I think the NFL has been a little bit more latent. Yes, there was the fight, the Eagles game and all that, but they've been a little bit more acceptable with the number of people they're letting in. But for me, there's just no reason for it. Like, I'll speak candidly for a second. I am an Islander fan more than I am almost anything on the planet, more than I am a human being at sometimes, as you know. And being a beat reporter for FUV for the Islanders is literally one of the greatest things that's ever had. It's awesome, right? It's the greatest thing ever. I get on the train, I go to the game, I eat free food, I go to the game for free, I get paid, and I sleep at my grandma's house and go back to class next. It's fantastic. And getting that taken away sucked. But sitting on the couch and watching them go further than I've ever seen them go before was still amazing. Yes, in game 3 against the Lightning, it hurt. That was like, man, they're wearing the blue jerseys. This game should be at the Coliseum, and I should be there. Yeah, it hurt. But they still played the game. They won. It was great. It's still sports without the fans there. Does it suck? Yes. Do I want to go back? Do I want more than anything to go to opening day at Yankee Stadium next year? Yes, but I'm probably not going to, because it just doesn't seem right. So I don't think that we should have all these fans in the stands. If you want to have 5,000 people, I guess that's okay. But when you're getting into the numbers, 10,000, 15,000, 25,000 people at enclosed Jerry World the other day, that's insanity, Andrew. That's crazy.
And this is the thing. I'm not against having fans in the stands. I would love for the stands to be jam-packed and to have media there and as beat reporters and fans for us to enjoy ourselves. But again, if these professional sports leagues made the conscious effort, why not require fans? Why not have a mandate where you have to bring an official negative test that is recent within 7 to 10 days that you have tested negative for the virus, at least, because there are so many people who are asymptomatic. Right. So if they take off their mask, they don't even know they have it. They could high five somebody. In our Section 102 podcast earlier for the Fordham Ram newspaper, our coworker Jimmy Sullivan made a great point about a Rosarena in the other game where the fan caught the ball and by accident threw his glove back at a Rosarena. Rosarena picks it up, throws it back to him. But what if this man right here was asymptomatic with the COVID virus, and then Rosarena ends up testing positive the next day or a couple of days later. So
Yeah.
I think that's a dangerous slippery slope that Major League Baseball is going through right now. I mean, granted, the season's almost over. The World Series is going to be wrapped up in the next 5 days or so. But again, they didn't have fans at first, and it was supposed to be a bubble environment with these 4 hub cities. But to break that bubble and to have fans in and go against even checking temperatures at the entrance of in Texas, to me, it's just there are free tests that people can take in each city, especially cities that have a higher percentage of reported cases. So again, I just think there is so much more that can be done to make sure that every fan that goes into a game knows that every other fan has at least tested negative and does not have the virus up to that point. Because at this point, it's really just a roll of the dice.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I went to the barber the other day and I had to get my temperature checked, but they can't give all these people their temperature checked. And they're significantly more uh, um, prone to getting the virus in that situation than I am in a one-person barber shop in middle of nowhere, Connecticut. I mean, so at some point, there just has to be common sense that prevails. I would love to see fans in the stands. I think that if you just take out what's happening for 3 seconds, I know you can't really do that, but if you do it for 3 seconds, it's great. But then you realize, like, there was a couple, I don't remember if it was Alabama, Georgia, or Florida A&M, one of the two. Maybe it was Georgia, Tennessee. It was any of the college football games where they panned into the crowd, and so they clearly went up to this group of, because when you're at a game and you see the guy with the giant camera and the host with the little microphone walking around, fine. So you see him coming and you get ready. So clearly the cameraman said to these guys, like, hey guys, like, you're going to be on the screen, like, put your mask on. So like these 4 guys all in a row with their Georgia hoodies on had the masks on. Then you look behind them and it's just like this cavalcade of people without masks on, all like on top of each other. It's like the 5 people that they showed on TV are like, oh yeah, like they're all roommates probably. We'll just assume that they're all roommates and they're far apart from everybody else. They all got their masks on, great. But just look behind them and there's people without masks on. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense for colleges, especially. I know I'm hammering home that point, but for real, like, I just don't understand why colleges are allowing all of these kids from their schools to go to the game. I know that there's no outside fans. It's only students mostly at most places. But like, why are you doing that? Like at schools up in the north where there's not big college sports atmospheres like Fordham, you're not allowed to be around people who aren't your roommates without masks on. But now, like, we could just go to a football game. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I hope that we're at a point one day where we don't have to discuss playing the World Series in front of nobody. But right now, that's the point where we have to discuss it. And we just have to face reality instead of what we want at some point.
Yeah, and you mentioned college football. The huge demographic of fans in those stadiums are 18 to 22-year-olds. So if you leave an 18 to 22-year-old at their own devices, they're going to put their mask down for most of the game. They're going to cheer and high five and hug somebody right next to them or somebody down the aisle just because they're happy that a big play or a touchdown was scored. I think that's the thing too. College football understands that a good chunk of their revenue comes from allowing fans in and having in-stadium revenue. The NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, they can get away with not having fans in the stands for a certain parts or certain portions of a schedule, whether it be regular season or postseason. But again, I think for college football, having fans in the stands is really what makes the college atmosphere what it is. And having student sections jam-packed and the fight song playing and sometimes hundreds of thousands of people just cheering, whether it be in LSU or Ohio State, where the capacity can go, over 105,000 people if they wanted to. So I think at the end of the day, yes, you might not want to watch it from your sofa, from your couch, but would you rather do that or take a chance? And some people are bringing their children to these games too. And so you're putting people at risk, and really just to watch a game that you could easily stay home, order some food, get the recliner out, and you're good. But again, I think some people are really just fed up with what the sports world is now as far as fans are concerned, and not being able to have been in stands for a 6-month period of time. And now everyone's back, and in the moment, forgetting that, hey, there's still a pandemic. Yeah, you're allowed to go to a football game, to a baseball game, but don't forget that just because you go inside these walls, into these venues, doesn't mean that when you get out, there aren't other people who could be affected by where you just went and you were just around moving forward, because we're still fighting a pandemic.
Completely agree. And I think one thing that's saving fans in the stands right now is we don't, how should I put this? Like, we don't have the identity of these people, right? We don't know who they are. So for all we know, some random person who went to Tennessee, Georgia 2 weeks ago has the coronavirus, and we just have no idea, right? Like we could look at dashboards for colleges, or we could look at the rise of cases in Arlington, Texas. But at the end of the day, we don't know if all of those people went to the game, if none of those people went to the game. We had no idea. And that's what's saving fans in the stands, right? Like, we were saying, like, oh, they're going to shut down baseball after a bunch of Marlins players got it because we knew it was the Marlins players. Oh, they're going to reschedule the Chief Patriot game because we saw all the people on the Patriots get the virus. Those people have not that people don't have identities. They have to tell us because they're part of the NFL. Those people who go to the games don't have to tell us. So we have no idea. For all we know, there have been 0 cases transmitted through fans. For all we know, there have been 1 million. I have no idea. And that, to me, is what's saving fans in the stands, is once they leave, it's not the people in charge's problem anymore.
Yeah, they can wash their hands of it once fans are gone and they go back to their regular day lives, where they could be exposing older people and younger children who are more susceptible to be harmed by the virus, So that's another thing. And that's why I have to commend the state of New York, because you think about the Jets, the Giants, the Bills, the Yankees, and the Mets earlier on. Nobody allowed any fans here in New York. And this New York fan base was starving to at least go back to Yankee Stadium, to go back to Citi Field, to go to MetLife. And even though the teams weren't playing like we wanted them to, but at least go back and have something to root for and be in that environment. So you think about the type of money that New York is losing by not allowing their fans in. That's why you have to commend states like New York for saying, you know what, we understand that we've kind of, that curve has been flattened a bit, but still, we're not going to take the chance, even at a limited capacity. We're not going to allow fans in until we are certain that everybody is healthy and safe.
Yeah, and I obviously have to include the state of New Jersey there, who made the decision before the NFL season even started that there was 0 fans allowed in the Meadowlands this season. I don't know. Syracuse is playing at home today against Clemson. I don't know if they have fans or not, but that's the only really big college football program, and they're not even that great, but in the state. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're 100% right that people who have no fans or have taken the separation of fans very seriously should be commended for that. Like, if I remember watching Chiefs Texans on opening night of the NFL, and it was really weird to see all those people separated like that. Like, it was very, very odd, but it looked like it was going decently well. Like, the Chiefs have those yellow seats. Like, all the seats are red, but then they put little yellow covers over all the ones that you're supposed to sit in. So there's 4 at a time. You can't confuse it. Just go to the yellow seats. When you watch a college football game, it's so different, man. It's crazy how different it is.
But no restrictions whatsoever. Student sections are just filled out. There is no 6 feet. You're not 6 feet from anybody if you're in the student section.
And in that one, my point from earlier, where the people in charge can wash their hands of it, that's not even true, because all those people are staying on the campus with the football players. So it's so I don't even know what to think about it anymore, man. I want more than anything for Garrett Cole to pitch in front of a packed Yankee Stadium in April. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I would just end it on this. Yearning for normality should not be worth potentially contracting a virus that has killed over 200,000 people in this country. That's all I'll say. As much as we want things to go back to normal, we're not out of the proverbial tunnel just yet, and people need to understand that. And sports fans especially need to understand that. And when we can go back, we will. But I just don't think right now it's worth it in the grand scheme of things. But Chris, before we say goodbye to everybody, it's only right that we give our fans winners, because that's what people need. They need to make some money, or they just want to feel good about the teams. It might be one of their teams. We're talking about a lot of great marquee matchups coming in week 7 tomorrow, and obviously with the Monday night matchup. Michael Legan will join us to break that down in our Who You Got segment. Chris, Michael, and I give you winners right after this break.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I am Michael Legan once again, and we are going to do our Who You Got segment. We're going to run through some matchups for this NFL Sunday. We're going to go around the table, or the proverbial table, and kind of pick some winners. So let's get started. First game we got here, it's the premier matchup, as I said earlier, Steelers versus Titans. Andrew, who you got?
I mean, the matchup we're watching here is Derrick Henry against this Steelers defense. I mean, you got to imagine that Mike Tomlin is going to have that box loaded with 8-9 guys and force Ryan Tannehill to beat them instead of Derrick Henry. But as we've seen, Ryan Tannehill has been beating people through the air when need be. This is a tough matchup, Chris, but I will give the Titans just the slight advantage at home. I think Derrick Henry does enough. They play methodical. They hold on to the ball just a bit longer than Big Ben in that offense. So I have the Titans winning a close one, probably by a field goal.
Yeah, I've been going back and forth on this game. I mean, Devin Bush is out for Pittsburgh, which is huge at the linebacker position. But they still have T.J. Watt and Bud Dupree, and the list goes on of great defensive players on that team. The advantage at quarterback and running back, I think, go to both of them go to Tennessee, and they're at home. But they're out Taylor Lewan at left tackle for the rest of the season. That's a big loss, especially with a team who prides themselves on running the ball. But Derrick Henry runs the ball up the middle mostly, so is that really going to impact them that much? I've been just turning myself over for this one. I'm going to pick the Titans simply because they're at home. That's the only reason I have for you. They're playing at home. I like how Ryan Tannehill is playing, so I'm going to pick the Titans as well in a close one.
Yeah, I'm also going to take the Titans, for the reasons you guys already mentioned. I like the running game here. I like Derrick Henry. And, I'm going to pick Tennessee, if only for the reason that Ryan Tannehill playing well is just another sign that Adam Gase is a terrible head coach. So give me Tennessee in this one. I think it'll be close. I think it'll probably be a very good game. So, I'll take the Titans. All right, our next matchup, we have Carolina going to New Orleans. Chris, who you got?
It's a tough one because I kind of like how Carolina's played. And Drew Brees has struggled to get the ball down the field, especially without Michael Thomas. But I'm not totally sold on Carolina's defense, and I think Alvin Kamara is going to rip them up. So I'll go closer than expected, 27-21 Saints.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to think about New Orleans. I think they've been one of the bigger disappointments coming into the season, just considering where people thought they would be at this point, just 3-2. But again, Carolina doesn't have McCaffrey. Teddy Bridgewater has been up and down, has shown some good signs, obviously, but, 5 interceptions, 6 touchdowns. I just have to think that New Orleans will at least get it right this week. They'll be able to take advantage of that Carolina defense, as Chris mentioned. And I think Kamara, Drew Brees, I think you get some Taysom Hill. I wouldn't be surprised if he had a big game with no Michael Thomas and with Emmanuel Sanders testing positive for COVID. So I think the Saints will do just enough and they win this divisional game against Carolina.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Carolina too, actually. I'm going to actually take Carolina here because, I just something about my gut. I like the way that Teddy Bridgewater has played this year. I like him. Now, I'm not as high on Matt Rule so far as Chris is because first year of a head coach, you can never tell me. Todd Bowles was 10-6 his first year. So, I'm not really going to judge him on that, but I like what I've seen so far. And there's just something about New Orleans. Something about them just seems off to me. I know they're first of all, they go into this game, they're not going to have Emmanuel Sanders. They're not going to have Michael Thomas. They're not going to have their center Nick Easton. So I'm a little concerned about the offensive cohesion there. And like I said, even though it's at home, there's no fans. So how much of a difference is that going to make when you saw Aaron Rodgers go down there, a place he's admitted that would be very difficult to play with fans, win a game down there. So Yeah, I'm actually going to take Carolina here. I kind of have a gut feeling about Carolina in this one. All right, so our next matchup, we have Tampa Bay, who just recently, as we know, acquired Antonio Brown. Not going to play this week. Going up against Las Vegas. Andrew, who you got?
It's hard after Tampa Bay annihilated Green Bay. What was it, 38-10? I think they put a lot of people on notice in the NFC that they're arguably the best team, even at 4-2, and with Seattle doing what they're doing. Man, I think that defense is going to have a field day against Derek Carr. I mean, you want Josh Jacobs. You hope that he can run the ball and relieve some of that pressure for Derek Carr. But I think Todd Bowles will be throwing the house. He'll be throwing some different exotic blitzes and coverages, trying to confuse Derek Carr. And I think Tom Brady on the other side with that offense, they're chugging along. They're going to be just fine. I think Tampa Bay goes on the road and they beat Las Vegas.
Yeah, I like Tampa as well. Their defense, to me, is the reason why they're an NFC contender. Yes, of course, they have the greatest quarterback of all time, Bruce Arians, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio. The list goes on offense, but their defense is arguably and statistically right now, and arguably the best in the league. So, to me, I think their defense. Now, granted, I almost said Oakland again. Granted, Las Vegas is just hung 40 points on the Chiefs. So it's going to be a very big test for Tampa's defense. It's going to be a very big test for for Las Vegas's offense. That's the side of the ball I'm really more interested in, and I think that Tampa's defense will come out on top. So I'll pick Tampa.
I am also going to take Tampa in this one. I feel the way that the Saints have played this year. I mean, the Seahawks are probably the best team in the NFC, but I would say the Buccaneers are probably the second best in my opinion so far. I even though they had a couple losses in there, lost to the Bears. That was a tough one. There's something about this team. I think Tom Brady's on a mission to show that he can win with that Belichick. And, like you said, the defense is what is carrying this team, like Chris said. And, I've been impressed with them. I mean, it's funny to me, at the one hand, that everyone is saying that Todd Bowles is this hot head coaching candidate, as if they're forgetting that the man was an awful head coach for 4 years, a few years there. So aside from that first season. So, it's interesting to me that he's suddenly a hot name again, like it never happened. But look, I like Tampa Bay. I like the offense, like I said, even though Antonio Brown's not going to be there this week, they already have weapons. Ronald Jones has been great. I think he's been – and everyone was like, oh, they got Leonard Fournette now. Well, no, Ronald Jones has been amazing, so don't count him out. And Las Vegas, I'm rooting for Derek Carr. I think he's a good player. I wanted to see him succeed, but, they're just kind of an up-and-down team. So I'm also going to take Tampa Bay in this one. All right, so next up, we got a matchup of two teams, San Francisco and New England. San Francisco will be traveling to New England. Chris, who do you got?
New England, because I don't necessarily believe in Jimmy Garoppolo anymore. I think without Mostert and losing Sanders in the offseason, his offense has taken a real hit. Deebo Samuel is a good player. George Kittle is great. I don't want to undersell that, but losing those two pieces takes away from an offense that was built around the weapons as opposed to the quarterback. And Garoppolo managed those weapons great, won the NFC, and he should be praised for that. But he isn't a throw the team on your shoulders and run them to an NFC championship kind of guy. He needs weapons around him, and lose Mostert being hurt, Sanders on the Saints now. They're just not as dynamic offensively, and they also lost Bosa for the season defensively. So I'm going to pick New England to bounce back this week at home.
Yeah, it's Jimmy G's first time at Gillette playing since he was traded, 3 or 4 years ago now? So, I mean, you imagine that Jimmy G's going to be motivated, but as Chris mentioned, they've been decimated by injuries. You mentioned Bosa, Solomon Thomas is out. This week, they'll be without Jimmy Ward and Quan Alexander. And I just think that bodes well for New England in their rushing attack. I would not be surprised if New England ran the ball over 40 times with Cam, James White, Burkhead, Damian Harris as well. I think they'll run the ball, control time of possession, and it'll be a low-scoring game, but I think Cam and the Patriots get it done against Jimmy G.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go with San Francisco in this one. I last week against New England's game against Denver was kind of an eye-opener for me. I understand that, it was Cam's first game back after COVID, and I'm sure there's a readjustment period, but the Broncos are not a good team. I mean, the fact that they beat the Jets by double digits should tell you something. I know Drew Lock wasn't exactly lighting it up, but I'm skeptical about what New England is on defense. Offensively, again, we can maybe throw the one out for Cam coming back off of COVID, but unless the offense, the Patriots offense is running the ball well, nothing about that team really scares me. I mean, you got Edelman there still, but I mean, what is the big threat really? And I got to give props to San Francisco's defense last week against LA, the Rams. They pretty much shut them down. They played a good game against them, and that was coming off of a bad game against Miami. So I think they kind of reasserted themselves there. Even with the injuries, like you said, Bosa's out, Solomon Thomas is out. I think that this is a solid team with a good defense still. They got a lot of depth. I like the 49ers in this game. As far as Jimmy G, you would think that maybe Belichick knows some of his weaknesses, but on the other hand, I think Jimmy G might be out to prove a little something here to Belichick, saying, now I know Belichick's the one who wanted to keep him, but say something like, hey, you traded me away, kind of a revenge game in a sense. So I'm actually going to go with San Francisco on this one. I kind of like them in this game. And, to me, it's kind of a sign of if New England loses this game, to me, it's really a sign of the times that these are not, the Patriots of old, per se. All right. Next up, we have the Bears against the Rams. Chris, who you got?
I like the Rams. I think the Bears are fraudulent, and Nick Foles isn't that good. I'm also not totally sure that Jared Goff is that great. But I trust the Rams a lot more. I think their defense is better. Aaron Donald against Khalil Mack, two of the best defensive, if not the best defensive players in the league, going up against each other. Again, not actually against each other, but against each other. Should be really fun to watch. This one's on Monday night, and I 5-1 is really good, but I don't think I believe in the Bears that much. So I'm going to go with the Rams.
Yeah, I mean, I'll always love Nick Foles. You gave me that Super Bowl. I was going to call it the Super Bowl, which I should probably call it that. But thank you, Nick. With that being said, I'll take the Rams, Mike.
Yeah, I'm actually going with the Bears. I don't really buy them either per se as a long-term contender, but I do buy that defense. I like that defense so far. Chuck Pagano, DC over there still, the Rams, they played a good defense in San Francisco last week. They didn't look that good. I mean, this is the same Rams team that barely beat the Giants. So I'm actually going to go with the Bears in this one. I don't know about their offense, but I trust their defense in this one.
Let it be known that I have just created Super Foles. So if any Philadelphia fan on Twitter says that, they stole it from me. Just want to be clear. But that was our Who You Got segment. Thank you so very much for that, Mike. We gave you winners. So if you feel any sort of way after Sunday and after Monday, don't blame us because you can't call in next week anyway. But special thanks to our guest today, former Major League Baseball umpire John Hirschbeck. Please check out magicofmichael.com if you want to bid on his auction, The Magic of Baseball, which runs through November 14th. If you've missed any of today's interview or highlights of the show, they will be available on Facebook Live, YouTube, and WFUVSports.com. The sports director of WFUV is Bobby Schaffardini. One-on-One has been produced, as always, by the fantastic Alex Walls. Until then, for Chris Hennessy and Michael Legan with the headlines, I'm Andrew Posadas. One-on-One is a production of WFUV Sports. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone.